If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
For those who've experienced paranormal, ghostly, demonic, or other strange entity encounters in haunted houses or locations, what's the creepiest encounter you still can't forget?
Haunted childhood doll. Up until I was about 10 years old, I lived in a townhouse built in the 80s. I loved and still do love that house. I fondly remember the beautiful forest behind it that I used to explore, build forts in, and play in with the neighbor's kid. However, the house wasn't without its flaws. As a kid, I couldn't sleep in my room. I almost always slept in my parents' room, and when I had to sleep in my room, I would cry all night or stay up playing with my toys. I had sleep issues due to chronic nightmares, like sometimes having bad dreams multiple times a night. These nightmares often included my thrifted doll, Tasha. Tasha was a typical blue-eyed and blonde-haired white doll. She was the size of an American Girl doll. According to my mom, I found her in the toy section in a thrift store and claimed that the doll had told me her name was Tasha. Obviously this freaked my mom out, and she became quite uncomfortable with Tasha. One night, when I was around 7, I couldn't sleep and decided to play with Tasha. Dumb idea, I know. I dressed her up in some doll clothes. Until I heard something that sounded like a little girl around my age giggling. I turned around for a brief moment and caught a glimpse of a pale girl looking through my bedroom window. The girl had blonde curly hair and was wearing some kind of nightgown. I don't remember the color. I slept in my parents' room again that night. I'm 14 and living in what feels like a haunted house in Sarajevo. Need advice. Hi everyone. I'm 14, and I live in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not really sure how to write this, but I need to talk to someone who might understand what I'm experiencing. I live in a very old house, somewhere between 50 and 70 years old. I don't live here alone, there's an older man in the house too, around 70 to 75 years old. He's not a relative, but he has lived here longer than I have. The problem is, I keep experiencing things I can't explain. I see, hear, and sometimes even feel things that don't seem normal. I hear footsteps in empty rooms, whispering when no one is around, and doors opening or closing by themselves. Occasionally I feel like someone is standing behind me even when the room is empty. At night I see shadows move where nothing should be moving. I don't know if these are ghosts, spirits, or just my mind playing tricks on me, but it honestly scares me. The older man in the house never talks about it, and I'm not sure if he notices anything or if he's pretending nothing is happening. I don't want to sound crazy, I just want to understand what's going on. Has anyone been through something similar? What should I do? Weirdest night of my life, something like a ghost wedding? So this happened a few years ago, and it still messes with me. I don't usually share this kind of stuff, but I need to get it out somewhere. I was over at my neighbor's one summer night. She is an older gypsy woman whom everyone on the street likes. Real sweet, always bringing over food or just sitting and talking. A couple of us were chilling in her kitchen, drinking tea and swapping stories. It was one of those slow evenings where nothing happens until we heard music. Not from a phone or a radio. It sounded live, drums, a violin, and people singing. Distant but close enough to make the hairs on my arms stand up. My neighbor went quiet for a second, looked at the door, and said, "Don't go out." I thought she was being dramatic. I was wrong. We looked towards the backyard. There's this open lot behind her house, usually nothing's there. In the moonlight there was a low haze, like mist. And in that haze were figures moving. At first I thought it was kids playing a prank. Then I realized they weren't quite right, semi-transparent, like smoke shaped into people. Some of them looked like they were missing limbs, others just floated slightly above the ground. One looked like it had no head, but it still kind of swayed to the beat. In the center were two more solid-looking silhouettes, a man in a suit and a woman in a white dress, standing like a couple. The rest circled them, keeping time with the music. They didn't look angry. Just there. The whole scene felt wrong and calm at the same time. My neighbor murmured, "It's their wedding again." She told us to stay inside, that they wouldn't come into the house while she had people there. I remember thinking, okay, whatever that means, she's seen weird stuff before. That made it sound ordinary, which is the weirdest part. Two of the people with us didn't buy it. One of them laughed and said it is probably someone messing around with speakers. The other said he wanted to go check it out. My neighbor begged them not to. "Please, don't," she said, voice shaking. They shrugged and left anyway. We watched from the window. They crossed the yard. The music sort of stopped for a beat, then the figures all turned and drifted towards them. The fog closed around those two for a second, just a second, and when it cleared, they were gone. No screams, no fight, Nothing. One moment they were there, the next they just weren't. We ran out, no footprints and no sign. The police did searches, nothing turned up. It's been years. No trace. My neighbor still lives there and says that sometimes, on certain nights, she hears the drums again. She says that if she looks out, she sees more faces in the circle, new ones. She says she has seen my friends there, smiling like they always do in photos, but their expressions seem empty. I don't know what happened. I don't have answers about whether these experiences are spirits, hallucinations, or something else. All I know is that after that night I stopped being the kind of person who thinks ghost stories are just stories. If you ever hear distant music at night and there is a fog hanging low, don't be clever. Stay inside. Haunted childhood home, true. For context, I'm 19 now. This happened when I was between the ages of 6 and 10. I am an 80% believer in the paranormal when it comes to other people's stories, but a 100% believer when it comes to my own. I have several stories to share, but this particular one remains inexplicable to me. I was probably 6 to 8 in this story, just judging by my bedroom. The layout is important, so please bear with me. As you walk into the hallway, it's the first room on the left. As you walk in, to your right is a straight wall, with no bump outs and no windows. On the back wall, right in front of you, is the window. To the left, there is another wall, and if you look directly left from your position at the door, you will see a bump out where the closet is located. That bump out is about a meter. My bed is positioned on the left wall as you enter past the bump out, with just the headboard touching the wall, and it may be less than a meter away. As a kid, and even now, I move a lot in my sleep, which often resulted in me kicking the blankets off, waking up cold, and having to reach out to put them back on. Well, this night was no different. I woke up cold and reached to my right to grab my blankets, but I felt an urge to look at my door, and when I did, I saw a kid peeking around. It was a black shadow that couldn't have been any taller than me at the time. I could make out a head, a shoulder, and a hand on the wall. I just went still, paralyzed with fear. I have 2 brothers, one older and one younger, who were with my dad at my grandma's house, so it was just me and my mom at home. When I saw it, I felt frightened, yet I refrained from yelling or screaming. I had to physically force myself to lie back down, and when I woke up, I forgot about it. It's only now that I remember it so vividly. I would see that boy often after that, always from the corner of my eye, like when you walk past a room and you think you see something, but you take a step back and look again and there is nothing. After we left that house in 2018, I haven't had any more of those. If anyone tries to debunk this and make their own theories on what could have happened, please let me know. My friend's house, haunted? When I was 14 I had a reoccurring encounter with a young girl. My friend's house was old, it had a concreted wall in his basement, blocking off a section. Turns out it was a family's grave from over 100 years ago. They never knew who or when exactly they were tombed in. Not that there's context for this strange property. The first time I saw her, there were several of us messing around in the backyard, flipping off the little playground they had, shooting Nerf guns at each other, and nut tapping. Stupid kid stuff. And as the sun was barely gone down, in a slight glow, there was a little pale girl. She had short black hair, a dark green sweater on, a dark green skirt, and lighter green leggings. Her eyes were black. She was just staring with one hand held awkwardly, like someone holding a wine glass but without the wine glass. I looked away for a moment, and she was gone. Another night, a little before midnight, several of us decided to sneak some drinks over and jump on the trampoline. We were having fun doing dangerous stunts on the trampoline. We stopped jumping around to have a drink. While all of us are attempting to sit still, the little girl from several feet away almost flashes to underneath the trampoline where we were sitting. Only I and our friend Mike noticed it. She didn't appear again that night. I had another encounter with her after I moved into their upstairs apartment as an adult. Sometimes I would hear very faint humming. I always thought it was their grandmother who lived downstairs, but after she had her stroke, she couldn't hum anymore. The almost silent humming still continued. The only other encounter with her was a day we were all hanging out in my friend's upstairs bedroom. Side note, it had a hidden creepy feeling crawlspace in his sliding door closet that he didn't know about for the first 16 years of his life. Anyway, we were just playing games and joking around when I looked out the window. She was standing in the corner of her yard, smiling while staring up towards the window. Again, Mike was the only other person to notice. She haunts me, true story, I genuinely wish it weren't. When I was little, I used to see things and hear people calling my name. I eventually got used to it and learned to ignore it. However, one day, after my mother picked me up from school and we were driving down a hill, A woman unexpectedly stepped into the middle of the road. I screamed at my mom to stop, but to my horror, the car hit her. I physically felt the car roll over a body. My mom pulled over and I spun around to see what had happened, but no one was there. I got scolded for scaring her. But since then, I often hear a woman's voice calling for me. A few weeks later, my friends and I were running past this old abandoned house we like to tell stories about. However, this time, when I looked, a woman and a child stood in the window. The same woman I had run over. I tried to tell my friends, but they all laughed and said, "Good story." As I tried to brush it off and ran away, a woman screamed in my ear and told me to help her. I turned and she was gone. Years later, I had a dream that a scary, bird-like man was in my room. But when I tried to escape, he held my shoulders and said, "I'm not who you should fear, you should be worried about her." I turned to see the woman crawling over my roommate like a spider. He gave me a set of instructions to protect her, but I failed to follow them. Shortly after, my roommate went crazy and overdosed, causing her immediate removal from the school. Recently, I was up at 2 a.m. and went to the restroom. I hadn't heard the woman in years, but as I was brushing my teeth, I heard my name softly spoken 3 times. I spun around and checked the hall to see if anyone was awake. My ha was in her room reading but insisted she hadn't heard anything. As I walked back, a cold breath suddenly brushed against my ear, and someone screamed my name. I panicked, and my ha ran over to me, and we checked the hall together to ensure it wasn't a prank. No one was awake. A few nights later, I had a dream that everyone was running away and being ended one by one. When I turned, the woman was chasing me. Right before she grabbed me, I woke up. I sat up in bed but was slammed back down. When I looked to my feet, there she was. With a wicked grin, her cold hands grabbed my feet. And I shut my eyes and willed the night away. After a few weeks I managed to put it all away after many therapy visits, but out of the blue my friend, I didn't tell her about this, walked up to me and said, "I don't mean to freak you out or anything, but are you aware that this shadow woman follows you? Is my house haunted?" So this has been happening since we moved into this house, for almost a year. It started right after we moved in. Whenever I'm in the basement, especially by myself, I feel like someone is watching me. Lately it's gotten worse. I got a dog a few months ago, and some nights he'll be lying on the end of my bed and suddenly just start growling and barking at the wall. He won't stop, even when I tell him to. Then he'll stop just as suddenly, curl up, and go to sleep like nothing happened. Recently, as in the last month, I've been seeing shadows. The first time it was like 1 a.m. or something, and I went to the bathroom. When I was going back into my room, I glanced down the hall behind me and saw a shadow, which would be the left shoulder and a head, move back behind the hall. I was scared as hell and went into my room and locked the door. This has happened a couple times since, sometimes in the same place as the first time, and other times in the doorway at the end of the hall, and when it's like that, it's usually the entire right half of a shadow, the other half is hidden behind the doorway. Last night was the closest I've got. So the hallway I usually see this thing in is L-shaped. My room is at the top of the long side of the L right outside my room. To the side, is the bathroom. I first saw it at the bend, where the office is, and I see the half figure. The living room is located at the end of the short side of the L-shaped layout and is positioned slightly to the side. So I was leaving the living room last night. I was looking down to open the gate because my dog isn't fully potty trained, so we keep him off the carpet. Anyway, I looked up, and like a foot away from my face was a shadowy head, not mine because the lights were off. It was oval-shaped, and its body was hidden behind the wall. There were gray streaks on the edges, like hair. I stumbled back, scared and confused as heck, and when I blinked, it disappeared. Now I know it's not a person, because during the week when I usually see it, there's only me and my mom at home. When I saw it last night, Mom was sitting in a chair in the living room behind me. I only ever see it at night or feel it in the basement. So is my house haunted, or am I crazy? I think my house is haunted. I moved into a house that was made in the 70s in Texas. When I first came here, I noticed a red-haired porcelain doll coin bank thing in the form of a little boy, full of rusty pennies. The owners just left it here, and they previously had a room called the Red Room upstairs. Once I was sleeping in that room, and I started to hear whispers, and everyone that slept there recalled hearing voices in a different language that didn't sound human. My mom slept there too and noticed the same. Then there was a banging on the closet door, like there was something in there. I screamed and called my mom into the room, and she heard it. It kept on going. Hesitantly she opened the door, and there was nothing. That night, it felt like something was under the bed, moving it and tugging on the blanket. My cat was looking at the door and being afraid. I couldn't sleep alone because I was scared, so my mom and I slept in the room downstairs after that. Even then, we heard loud clawing and scratching noises on the carpet every night, but my cat wasn't in the room. She turned on the lights, and it stopped. Sometimes there's a sound like someone is playing around and kicking a ball and running on the roof. Every guest that comes over complains about the same thing and the events that happen. There are heavy footsteps upstairs and on the stairway when there is no one home. A voice mimics family members who are not present, calling out to them. Everyone has experienced the same thing. Then sometimes my mom would read the Bible, and the doorknobs would turn on their own frantically. I was performing a spell upstairs in the red room, and when I lit the candle and stated my intention, the lights in that area of the house turned off by themselves and then started flickering. I don't think it's a ghost, it's demonic activity, maybe because something bad might have taken place in the house before. It could have been a homicide that left negative energy in the house or black witchcraft. I believe there are entities. Creepy forest near my house. So I'm not really sure if this fits here, but I figured I should share it. There's this forest near my house that I just cannot stand to be near after dark. I go biking a lot and occasionally run down a trail that leads to this forest. During daylight hours, it is a stunning location. In fact, I enjoy spending time there. It's a marshland, so the trail is a pleasant boardwalk. However, once dusk arrives, I cannot stay there. I just get this feeling of being watched or chased. Usually I go riding around that time of day anyway. So I just ride my bike up to the start of the forest and then turn around. Today, which is why I'm sharing, I stopped near the forest edge. I saw a bunch of lightning bugs and wanted to look at them for a minute. After a few seconds I heard a noise from the forest trail. My first thought was that it was just another biker, runner, or something similar. Still, it put me on edge. I decided it was time to leave anyway, so I got back on my bike when I heard a baby's cry. I left immediately, and as I was biking as fast as I could out of there, I heard it 2 more times. It sounded like it was coming out of the forest, but also like it was from all around me. It was also the loudest the last time, when I was the furthest from the forest. The entire time I was escaping, I felt as if someone were chasing and watching me. I know I could have been a bird, and I was terrified by the sound, so I didn't even try to figure out what it was, but I really think it was a baby's cry. It sounded just like a baby or child going wah 3 times. I'm just really freaked out by it. My childhood home was haunted. Here's a story. So, throughout my childhood, we would have so many on and off encounters. Like we had a little ghost child in the house. My sister described her wearing a blue dress with long brown hair. I was approximately 7 years old. I never had any encounters with her, but I have had my personal experiences with various phenomena in my mother's house. We'll start with a short story. When I was about 17, I went downstairs to make some ramen at around 12 at night. Normally when I go back up the stairs, I walk up them with my phone flashlight since the big light would wake my parents. Since my hands were full, I had to walk back up the stairs without any light. My house has 2 sets of stairs, and when I reached the middle landing before the second set, I heard loud stomping sounds that grew louder and faster, as if something were running up the stairs. I ran as fast as I could up the second set of stairs and quickly flicked on the light switch. When I turned to look, nothing was down them. I was pretty creeped out. I thought about what my grandma told me the last time I got spooked. She said, "Don't let it know you're scared, tell it to go away," so that's exactly what I did. I told it to go away and went on with my night trying to forget about it. Later that night I rolled over to go to bed facing the wall, and as I was lying in bed, I could hear the floor creaking and what sounded like footsteps around my room. I worked up the courage to roll over and look, and there was nothing in my room. So, this time I closed my eyes facing my room, and again the footsteps and creaking came back. At this point I'm scared, so I open my eyes, and there's nothing again. I walk to my mom's room, wake her up, and ask her to burn sweetgrass and tell it to leave. I followed her around the house as she went into each room, telling it to go away. When you burn sweetgrass, you have to leave a window open so it has a place to exit. We left the kitchen window open. The rest of the night I slept without any more problems. In the morning, my mom informed me that Rocky, our dog, had escaped sometime last night. The back gate was wide open, and the camera facing the backyard had stopped working at 2 a.m., despite her having just replaced the batteries the night before. Well, here's the spooky thing. We burned the sweetgrass at around 1:50, and the kitchen window, which faced the backyard, overlooked the area where Rocky was, along with the camera and the gate. The reason I don't go to my aunt's house. I was 5, and my mom dropped me off at my aunt's so I could have a sleepover with my cousins while she worked. Well, I went to bed in the basement. Some background info: my aunt had a miscarriage when she was 22. All I know is that it was a girl, and my aunt wanted to name her Beatrice. At around 3 a.m. I woke up to hearing some girl talking upstairs. I thought it was my cousin Candace, but I saw her sleeping right next to me, so who was it? It wasn't my aunt's voice. Eventually I gained the courage to walk upstairs only to see a girl who looked no older than 10 talking to herself. I didn't know her, but she looked familiar. Being a stupid kid, I went up to her and said hi. She looked at me and smiled and introduced herself as Beatrice. She then gestured for me to go outside. I shook my head, but she kept gesturing for me to go outside. I said, I don't want to go, it's dark. Her expression changed to a frown, and this was the point I realized I don't know this girl, and neither does my aunt, so who is she? I asked her why she was in my aunt's house, and she then got angry and grabbed me by my arm to try to drag me outside. I yelled and ran to the basement and locked the doors. I could hear her screaming. The next day I was talking to Candace about what happened, and she got confused and asked her mom, who got nervous and just told me and Candace to play outside. I heard her on the phone with my mom saying, does he even know about her? As I got older, the more I went to my aunt's, the more I saw Beatrice leering through doorways or standing in my aunt's backyard. I decided to never go to my aunt's again and still won't. The most haunted house I ever lived in. When I was 14, I was sent by my mom to live with my sister and help with the children since I dropped out of school. I had a hard time reading at that time, and it was when the school district pushed passing grades to everyone. High school was quite a shock after grade school, so I was appointed the task of babysitting family members. The house was white. A frame home with 3 small bedrooms upstairs and 1 large one down, just off the living room. You might say it was a dining room or possibly an office area. It was the cold room. My sister had a huge blanket covering the entrance to that room to keep the living room cozier. I was simply terrified of that room. The living room was quite small, with enough room for a couch and, directly in front, the TV. From that angle I could see the stairs to the upper bedrooms. It was the worst place to be able to see, night or day. I have never researched the history of the house. As I got older, I didn't want to know what went down there. I was sitting on the couch watching VHS movies when I saw someone speed down the stairs. I heard rumbling from the shaky old house too, so I yelled, "Get to bed, D." I went and swiped the curtain to the cold room open and saw absolutely no one standing in there. I went through the door by the stairs, there was no one. What the duck? I said to myself. I went upstairs to tell the kid to quit goofing around. I opened the door only to see him fast asleep with drool all down his cheek. Sometimes I felt like I was in that horror movie zoom-in scene of realization. I wanted to run home to mommy, but I couldn't. I went back downstairs and just sat there feeling scared until my sis got home and told me to get to bed. I remember one weekend my brother coming to hang out with me because strange things kept happening. I heard loud running noises coming from upstairs while the kid was sleeping. I saw white flashes run down the stairs. I was so scared to even go up to use the bathroom. My little brother and I were sitting on the floor playing cards. I felt completely okay doing that. I asked about how mom was doing and engaged in all the usual small talk. As the night grew darker, things started to happen, but my brother kept making me forget about it all. Then I saw it. Oh God, I have chills writing this. The curtain covering the doorway to the cold room lifted, and a small opening appeared at the bottom. I saw a face staring out at us. It was more or less a shape. I could see the nose, a small mouth, and the whites of the eyes. My brother saw my face go white and my eyes fill with fear. He asked, "What's wrong?" I said, "There's a face looking under the blanket." His eyes widened in shock, but he didn't look at the face. He jumped up and ripped the blanket off the doorway and said, "Get out of here, we don't want you here." I was 14, he was 9. I was so impressed by his bravery I told my mom when I visited. After a while I decided that staying upstairs at night was the safest, most protected part of the house. I looked out the window of my nephew's room, stared at him while he slept, and wished he had a better home to live in. To this day, I continue to experience nightmares about that house. In those dreams, there are always numerous unfamiliar individuals walking around. They do not appear to notice me, they rummage through drawers, inspect the cupboards, or ascend the stairs, yet at times they simply stand by a window, gazing outside. It's more of a sad dream than scary. I wonder if they got stuck and if they can even see what's out the window. They tore the house down. I don't know when it happened, but whenever I drive past and look, I can still feel the house's energy, which remains heavy and haunting. I really don't want to live in another haunted house, and I thank God that nothing ever happened to the kid. He was a little shit that always told his mom I hit his head, but I still love the little turd. Thanks for listening. I wish nothing but good and happiness for all. I feel like my house is haunted. So I feel like my house might be haunted. Here is some backstory. My husband was married 12 years. And she passed away. Her ashes are here at the house. We are 32 and 33. Together, we have 4 kids. So here is where it gets weird. Since I moved in, I've noticed that weird stuff happens. For example, my toddler's TV kept making sounds as if it were trying to load a movie. The TV would work when my stepdaughter was in the room, but it started spinning after she left. It's little noises, loud noises, and sleepless nights. But this week stuff has gotten weirder. My son, 11 years/0, comes in our room at 1 a.m. and just says, "Hey, are you guys sleeping?" And we say no to him. And he just walked out. My husband went to check on him, and he was passed out asleep. 4 nights later my toddler comes in, my husband says, "What are you doing up?" And she screamed, "I don't know," and ran back to her room. At the same time as my son, she was also fast asleep. Tonight I woke up to a loud thud. I was checking cameras and saw something that alerted my office cameras hours earlier. And its lights turning on and off twice. Any advice is welcome. My husband doesn't believe in these things. But everyone in the house has noticed stuff. My grandpa's haunting experience. Okay, so my grandpa told me a story about how his house he owned in the 70s was haunted. A lot of weird things would happen, like cabinets being opened in the morning, and they would hear noises during the night. But the worst things happened in my uncle's room. My grandpa said it was always very cold in there. My grandpa also told me that his secretary at the time, who claimed to be a psychic, had dinner at their house. While he was showing her around, she entered my uncle's room, where he was a baby, and suddenly froze, saying that something was very wrong. The thing is, my grandpa never even told her about the weird things that they had experienced in the house and that anything was wrong. He told me the funniest thing was when he and my step-grandma just finished making love, they heard a creepy voice say, "Thanks for the entertainment," and he immediately got up and looked to see if anyone was in the tree by their window and then searched the house and found nothing. He asked the neighbors if they had placed a speaker in their room, but they never found one. Even if there had been a speaker, this was the 70s, so there were no cameras that could record without being seen. The neighbors told him that the man who owned the house raised his 4 boys there, and one died in World War II. If I had to guess, that boy's room was my uncle's room. To this day, my grandpa still believes there's a logical explanation for this but has yet to come up with one. He does not believe in the paranormal. I personally believe it was paranormal, but I wanted to share this to see what others think. My apartment was haunted. This story came from my 3rd cousin. Hi, I'm Sam, and this is my story. I was moving into college in 2014, about the time my girlfriend and I got together. And for my college, I rented an apartment close to the college grounds. It was not a bad place to live, it was a typical apartment. Despite our friends saying the apartment was haunted, we didn't believe in the paranormal. We just laughed it off and said, "Guys, come on. What the hell could happen? It's just an apartment." I now regret those words leaving my mouth. My friends were correct. One cold December evening, 2 months after we moved up, I noticed something weird. Almost every night I'd wake up at about 2 a.m. for no reason. I was confused, as I'm a pretty heavy sleeper and not usually easy to wake up. I always felt cold and scared when it happened. Then one night, I had a dream. A very realistic dream. I woke up at 2 a.m. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and when I went back to the room, my girlfriend, let's call her Angela, was floating, body limp, head looking down. "Babe?" When she looked up, I saw what I want out of my mind. She had the hugest of smiles on her face. "Hello, Sam." Her voice was distorted. She straightened her spine. All her bones seemed to crack in this motion, and I screamed as loud as I could. Then I woke up. Angela was sleeping like a baby. I brushed it off as a dream, just a dream. I fell back asleep and forgot about the incident. But it doesn't stop there. Almost 9 months later, Angela was on a vacation with her family, and I just got home from school. But something felt off. It was cold. It was silent. I walked to our bedroom, and I couldn't believe my eyes. She was in the same position, floating in the air. "Hello, dear. You thought I wouldn't come back?" I was ducking terrified. The door slammed shut behind me, and the spirit zoomed at me and pinned me against it. She laughed maniacally. "You thought you could escape?" The spirit said in a loud, demonic, and distorted voice. I have no shame in admitting I pissed myself right then and there. Then I thought of a plan. "Why, hello, Master," I said. I kneeled. "How lovely it is to see you." "What?" At that moment, with the spirit caught off guard, I ran. I didn't stop until I was at my friend's place. Apparently, A woman had died in that exact apartment. It is said that her spirit haunts the apartment to this day. Needless to say, I moved out, and I'm always researching a home before I buy it. But I escaped. Honestly, I'm going to do the same thing. Something's been haunting me since I was a kid. Help me figure out what it is. When I was a kid, I lived in this old house in Other California. It was secluded in the middle of the woods. It was 2 stories, technically 3 if you count the basement. Mind you, this house always gave me the creeps. I vividly remember multiple times seeing this super tall, around 8 foot tall woman. She wore a black dress and a big old almost vintage hat that hid most of her face. I remember seeing her outside the 2nd story window in my room. Or on the bend of the stairs by the window. I even remember her chasing me around in the crawl spaces of the basement-like room where my toys were. Anyway, as I grew up, I chalked it up to just nightmares because who believes in ghosts, right? Fast forward to last year, I moved to Idaho, and my mother came to visit me and my brother. We had been watching a scary movie beforehand. And as we're all just lying next to each other on the couch, I start talking about how my father's house gave me the creeps and how I'd constantly have nightmares about this woman. And my brother proceeds to shoot up and go, "Wait, what did she wear?" And my mother responded, "Was it a black dress and hat?" In that moment, my heart dropped. I got really bad chills, and I told them all about the stuff that had happened. My brother recounted experiencing sleep paralysis in our room on the bunk bed, where he saw the top of her hat and realized that she must have been staring at me. And my mom saw it all the time in the bathroom at night looking in through the tiny window. And there's more weird shit. Anyway, really weird shit has always happened around me. And I guess I just want to know what the duck it is. A crawling woman in a haunted auditorium. At my high school we have an old stage and a new one. The older one doesn't really get used as much since the construction of the new one and is actually getting bulldozed this summer. Now there have been rumors of both stages being haunted for as long as I've known. I know upperclassmen who swear they saw an old woman sitting up on the catwalk, but when they went to check it out, no one was there. The old stage is where my story takes place. During some free time one day, I and a few other friends went to investigate the old stage. We were messing around in the costume area, backstage, and in the sound booth. We even pulled out a cheap ghost tracker app just for fun. Keep in mind, this is during the school day, but it's almost pitch black in there. We started to leave, and the people that got to the doors first held them open for us, so that allowed a little bit of light to come in. As we were walking back up the rows of seats to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my left eye. It looked like a woman on all fours quickly crawling towards me. Now this wasn't a normal crawl, it was practically a sprint on her hands and feet. She had dark, messy hair and ragged clothes. I quickly did a double take, and she was gone. Normally, I would say I just got in the spirit of things and tried to convince myself I saw something, but the way my heart jumped, I know that can't be true. I don't know what I saw there, but it scared me more than anything else ever has. I think my grandma haunts my dad's house. Hi, this is the first time I've ever spoken about this to anyone, including my family. My parents are not together, they have been separated for 13 years, and my custody arrangement, since I no longer visit my dad's house, is as follows. I spend a week with my mom, including the first 5 days of the following week, and then I spend that weekend with my dad. My grandma died 4 years ago due to COVID, but before that there was already tension between her, my dad, and his siblings. It's a long story, but to put it simply, he lived in her actual house, which is a little run down, while she lived with her husband, not my biological granddad, because her husband was disabled. In the house, her bedroom was downstairs, while the other 2 bedrooms and a storage bedroom were upstairs. My dad always told me to not enter my grandma's room, even more so when she died. Soon, the room became a mess and was used for storage, even though her bed, mirror, and other belongings were still there. Another detail that'll be important is that in one of the kitchen's walls there was a hole behind the trash can, which is now covered up. A few months after my grandma died, I started hearing strange noises coming from that wall, and before you suggest that it might have been rats, I can assure you it wasn't. I had previously informed my dad that the noises might be from rats, and he went to check, but he found nothing. He even installed a camera, similar to those that can be hung on your house and do not require daily charging, for the following week until I returned. When we reviewed the footage, there was nothing. My dad thought that it was just my imagination, but I think otherwise. Months later, while I was still hearing those noises, a court case occurred between my dad and his siblings over the ownership of the house we lived in, which caused a significant rift in the family, pitting them against my dad for reasons I won't elaborate on. During that time, I was dealing with mental health issues and whatnot, and I often stayed awake hours into the night. I would always hear noises around 3 to 4 a.m. I would hear noises coming from both the hole in the kitchen wall and my grandmother's bedroom. I chose to disregard the sounds, assuming they were merely a result of my sleep deprivation. But I kept hearing it for months, and one night I went into my grandma's bedroom. It was just as messy as usual, except for one of the blankets on her bed. I swore I had seen it move, like as if she were still alive and getting up in the middle of the night. I quickly ran into the bathroom and locked the door, remaining there until about 5 a.m., when I finally went out and got back into bed. During my last 2 years while staying with my dad, I kept hearing the same noises in the bedroom and the kitchen, sometimes even in the basement. It's a type of basement under the stairs. We can lift the stairs up, and it reveals the basement, but neither my dad nor I have entered that in years, because it's been taped down for at least a decade. I think that my grandma is haunting my dad because he won't give up the house to his siblings so they can sell it. I might just be delusional, but I swear that one time I had even dreamt about it. I can remember most of my dreams very clearly, and this is one of them. In it, I went into my grandma's bedroom again, and I saw her sitting on her bed and getting up from it with a hospital gown on. I remember her saying something, but the only thing I remember is her saying my father's name. From what I know, because my mom's and my dad's siblings are still in contact, the house is in shitty condition, and my dad generally doesn't leave it. I might be crazy, but I thought I should share my story. True story, Haunted Inn. The family was staying at an inn that was temporarily shut down to the public, and I was a friend brought along. The inn was isolated in the mountains, with no neighbors. It was very old. Walking up to the building, you can sense that something's wrong. In the public areas of the inn there are mirrors on the wall, and they are deeply unsettling even before you hear the stories. There were 2 of us in each room, sleeping across the hallway from each other on the 2nd floor, and nobody else. Several paces down the hall from us there were stairs going up to a door in an unused attic loft area. It's rainy and cold outside. My roommate and I woke up seemingly randomly around the same time, and while going back to sleep, we heard the sounds of footsteps on the wooden stairs going to the attic. It sounded like somebody was standing on the stairs shifting their weight and otherwise moving slowly. It was so obviously a person that we weren't afraid. We thought it must be the owners who had decided to stay. But it was 2 a.m. or something. We lay there listening. When we heard the first voices, we just looked at each other with our mouths open. When we heard what sounded like kids singing outside, we started taking turns sitting up and looking at each other with our hands over our faces in an expression of "Did you hear that?" Soon after, we got up and opened the door, prepared to find out what was going on. The people across the hallway heard our door open, and they also came out and were freaking out. Also, the attic door was open, and something made a thump noise downstairs in the dark. We all slept in the same room. The attic door was still open in the morning, but I swear it was more open before. This location required you to either stay at the inn or continue driving, as pulling over to the side of the road was not an option. So it would be noticeable in most realistic situations if other people were there for any reason. There just wasn't anybody there for miles. The funeral home mirror, haunted mirror. I found this mirror in the abandoned Moulton and Kyle funeral home in Jacksonville, Florida. I have always loved exploring abandoned places, and this was on my bucket list. I met up with a friend, and we quickly entered the building. The place was decaying and falling apart. There was old furniture, caskets, and even a hearse left behind. In the rubble I found this mirror. I normally don't take things from the places I explore, but there was something about this mirror. I had to take it. My friend didn't like the idea, he found it disrespectful. I didn't listen to him and still took it with me. I hung it in my living room. The next day my mom and sister came over and told me they don't like it. They said it made them feel lightheaded and nauseous when they were around it. I was skeptical because I didn't feel any of that. I thought they were just feeling that way because they knew where I got it from. A couple of days later a friend of mine comes over and is immediately drawn to the mirror. I stepped out for a second to answer a phone call. When I came back in, I saw him staring into it as if he were in a trance. I put my hand on his shoulder to ask him if he was okay, and he jumps back and backpedals towards the kitchen. He was breathing hard and on the brink of tears. He told me he saw an elderly version of himself mouthing words with shadow figures swaying back and forth behind him. He left and has refused to come back. I thought it was all in his head until last night. I was lying on my bed, and then I heard footsteps in the living room. I get up to check and see nothing. I was alone. As I was walking back to my room, I stopped and stood right in front of the mirror. I looked directly into it. Almost instantly I felt like I was in a daze. I began seeing a black mass cover my face from left to right. Then I see a hand reach over my shoulder and wrap around my neck. I snapped out of it and ran to my room. My whole body was cold, and I felt a stinging sensation on my neck. I was terrified but fascinated at the same time. I didn't sleep. I was thinking about it all night. I waited for the sun to come out and then put the mirror in my shed. I've told people about my experience, and they tell me to get rid of it. I understand why they would say that, but I feel oddly attached to it. I feel like it has something to say, and I want to find out what it is. Every house I have lived in has been haunted. I am 16 years old, and I've moved 3 times already, but I still remember this to this day when I was 5 years old. When my mom put me to bed and turned off the light, I saw a tall figure with a top hat, and the worst part was the red eyes, the ducking red eyes. Every time I saw the eyes and the man, I would let out an ear-piercing scream, and my mom would come in scared, seeing me crying and pointing at the corner. She would roll her eyes, put me in her bed, and we would have a blast watching scary movies and action movies, willy-nilly, from Transformers to Nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't mind the scary movies, it's just that every time I saw that man, I would let out a scream until it got to the point where my mom just let me sleep in her room. Fast forward, my mother was evicted from the house due to her marijuana use, but she gifted me a Nintendo Wii prior to her departure. I still loved my mom, but it was weird because when she was gone, the man stopped appearing. But here's the worst part, I saw him in dreams every Tuesday and screamed. When my grandma got tired of the screaming, I slept with my grandpa. Fast forward, I was 12 or maybe 13, and my uncle and aunt just moved in with my cousin and new cousin. I never got to sleep in my room because it was being used for my newborn cousin, or, well, he was 2 years old. The only time I was allowed in there was when I went to get toys. However, when I slept either downstairs in the basement or upstairs on the floor with my grandpa, I would always dream of a girl with huge fangs and black eyes. It happened every 1 to 2 weeks, and I would wake up scared shitless, then stay up all night watching TV or playing video games on my grandpa's phone, Xbox 360, or PlayStation 4. This kept going until I was 14 and finally moved into my room. Not even a day later, I got a new ghost, but it was a little boy. He said that his mommy and daddy were sorry about what they had done to me. I was so confused until I realized, and when I woke up the next morning, I looked up my address. Apparently, there was a married couple with a boy who died. Shortly after, I moved out because my uncle received the house and chose to sell it. When I moved into the new house, I got a weird feeling about it. Not to mention the house was old, with a rusty shed out back and old rooms. I didn't care, but I was in a duck everyone phase and stayed up much later than everyone else, going to bed at 2 or 3 a.m. During this period, I played Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, the typical games, and I would hear noises coming from above. Furthermore, when the lights were turned off, I would hear whispers suggesting that I wanted to end myself or hurt myself. I didn't mention it because I knew I was never suicidal. I had many people who cared about me. As a year went by, things got worse. I kept having nightmares about murder, death, and people screaming. I said, fine, duck it, and then I pulled the same thing at the old house and looked up its history. Apparently, it was the house of a big family that were being hunted and ended themselves. I was horrified and asked about this to the owner since we were renting. She went pale and ignored me, and I was shocked but didn't care. This year, we were kicked out because the owner became tired of the increasing house payments and decided to sell the property. We moved into my uncle's house, but despite being there frequently, I noticed that things started to go missing and objects began to move on their own. I asked my aunt about the strange events, and she said they knew about them and even named the ghost. I was curious, not because of the house's history, but because of the ghost. At this point, I wanted to be friendly to the dead. When I have dreams of ghosts that usually scare people, instead I talk to them. Some don't respond, some do, and some use sign language. I've grown a connection to the dead, but I don't mind it at this point. In the house I lived in my first year of college, it constantly felt like we were being watched. Although, part of that may have been me being paranoid because my boss kept telling me he liked to watch me from the bushes across the street. Ugh. Anyways. We would hear footsteps walking down the hall when we were home alone, phantom voices, and the whole works. One of the other girls started talking to the ghost so it would see her as a friend and she'd be safe. About halfway through the year, something started moving in our attic. It always sounded like stomping, too heavy to be a squirrel or raccoon. We all told ourselves that that's what it was anyway. I found dirty upside down handprints a few inches from the ceiling. I still hope that it was just an elaborate prank. It backed up to a small park. Our back door was maybe 300 feet or so from the playground. We would sometimes hear screams at all hours of the day and night, but I rarely saw anyone actually there. A few times I checked within about 5 minutes of hearing the screams, but it was still empty. Apparently the girls who lived there before us had the same things happen to them and would swear that there were people in the kitchen, even when they could see that it was empty. I got out of there as soon as I could, but believe me when I say it was not nearly soon enough. I think our friend might be haunting our apartment. I think our friend who passed a month ago unexpectedly at 23 might be haunting our apartment. So let's begin with how this even started and why I might think this way. So back on the 13th of June, I texted my friend, who was still alive at the time, to see if he wanted to hop onto Discord so we could chill and talk. He texted me on the 14th of June at 12 a.m., which was likely the last time he would come online, and I left it at that. Days passed, and by the 16th of June, there was still no communication from him, and he had not come online. I had a horrible gut feeling, which escalated into a full-blown panic attack, and I feared he was dead, even though there were no leads to support that thought. Well, 17th June comes around, and we text his mom to see if she knows where he is. She says she hasn't heard from him since the 13th. The next day, his mother had to call in firefighters and police to break into his apartment for a welfare check, and there he was, supposedly having passed away from an accidental overdose or complications related to his diabetes. Now here's the thing, nothing strange happened around this time except for funny coincidences, and we thought nothing of it. A day before the funeral, we drove to his apartment to look through the window and check if it still contained all his furniture, as none of his family members wanted to accept his inheritance due to his significant debt. We desperately want a piece of his life as a way to remember him. For example, he wrote poems, and we wanted to find the book containing the poems and tattoo them. Since then weird shit started happening, especially after I started laying tarot cards. On the 14th of July, exactly 1 month after his last message ever was sent, we lay in our bedroom, and we heard stomping next door. We heard it straight from the living room, as if someone were pacing back and forth. This went on from 2 to 3 a.m. almost. None of us dared to check it out. Now, in that time, I stopped laying tarot, and it stopped until I laid some tarot cards for my friend, asking how he is in the afterlife and all, 3 days ago. Yesterday we heard loud footsteps in the living room again. This time it sounded even as if it were coming from the hallway, as if someone took 4 steps from the living room to the hallway. It started at 1 a.m. this time. The date doesn't have any significance, though, to our friend, so we're kind of confused about what the hell or who the hell that was. A friend of ours next door came over with a Bible, and the moment he stepped into the living room at 2 a.m., the light by the wall started flickering. The stomping stopped, though. Now my question is for anyone, could it be the tarot cards? May we somehow have gotten his spirit to cling to us or our apartment since the last time he visited was 2 weeks before his death? We were the closest to him and the last ones to ever be in contact with him. I'm even considering burning my tarot cards at this point and getting some smudge sticks to cleanse the apartment. How the hell can we get rid of this since it's been terrifying us? Please, we need genuine tips and help on how to stop this. And yes, I stopped laying tarot cards and even cleansed them. I'll burn them in the coming days. There's an old Grange hall back where I'm from that was used for square dances, town meetings, and private events. As a child, my parents would take me to square dances. Yes, I am from rural America, and I would play with the other children outside, as we had no interest in participating in square dancing. We were always terrified of the woods behind the hall. Behind the hall there was a wildlife refuge wood/swamp that had miles of trails. Back in the pre-Civil War days, it used to be a fairgrounds. I have many stories about this place, a few I'll include here. When I was about 7, my mom took my younger brother, 5, and me into the woods to pick morel mushrooms. We were deep into the woods when suddenly my mom froze and told my brother and me not to speak. She carried my brother and made me run. We ran through the woods until she came to a fallen tree. She hid me under the tree and crouched with my brother behind the roots, and we waited for a while, then left the woods. I don't remember why this happened, nor has anyone spoken about it. When I was older, 12, my grandpa was taking me foraging, and we pulled up to the Grange and began walking towards the woods across the road. I began feeling really uneasy. My stomach dropped as we stepped into the marshy area, and I had this get out now feeling, but I didn't want my grandpa to think I was scared. He turns around, looks at me, and says, "This doesn't feel right. We need to go." And with that, we turn around, get back to the truck, and leave without ever speaking of this again. When I was 13, I zoned out at a friend's house nearby the Grange and woke up staring at the stars on my back underneath the lamp in the Grange's parking area, a half-mile from my friend's house. It was near midnight, and I was gone for approximately an hour, but no one noticed my absence, and when I returned, it was like I hadn't left at all. I have a story written about this experience if anyone is interested in it. The place just has always given me a feeling of dread, and I have a few scary stories about it, plus numerous creepy experiences I've had. I've been to the place probably over 100 times in my life, and every time I've been there, something unsettling has happened. The 200-year-old house I grew up in was definitely haunted. After spending a lot of time on here, I've come to realize that my childhood home had some strange things going on in it. The most disturbing one is the realization that the shadow I'd see periodically throughout my youth peeking into my doorway, watching me sleep, might not have been my mother. In the early years we spent in that house, I remember my mom had a bad habit of standing outside my doorway and slowly peeking her head in to check up on me. The way my room was set up, my door opened on the right, and walking into the left was the foot of my bed. I recall feeling frustrated with her and raising my voice, urging her to simply enter my room like a typical person. I must have been about 8 or 9 at the time, and she'd do this during the day and during the night to all of us on her nightly trips up to the bathroom on the second floor. As a loving mother, I'm sure she just took the moment to ensure that we were breathing and to gaze fondly at her children. She also has a bit of a prankster spirit, so she'd intentionally creep her head around the corner of my doorway to mess with me and laugh when I'd get upset. I recall one night in particular when I awoke. I left my doorway open to let in light from the street, as it opened onto the living room. I did not like sleeping in the dark since I had no windows. Anyways, I awoke with a strange feeling of dread. As I groggily processed this, staring at the doorway, I saw a head peek into my room slowly and deliberately and stare at me. I could not make out any facial features since it was black. I remember my blood turning to ice and feeling absolute fear. I froze and we just stared at each other for the longest time until it slowly leaned its head back outside my room. Eventually I fell asleep. I began sleeping with the door closed and a lamp on in my room. I chalked it up to my mom checking up on me and being a scaredy cat. But now as an adult I realized 2 things. 1. I should have been able to somewhat see my mother's facial features in that lighting. 2. It wasn't the only strange thing I saw in that house. I saw a black dog run downstairs one night after I used the bathroom. We had 2 dogs during that time. One of them was black, so I assumed it was her and somehow got into the house without anyone noticing. Another time I saw a lady with black hair standing outside my bedroom when I opened the door to use the bathroom. I moved into an extremely haunted house in Indiana. I moved into a house in Indiana a few months ago. It seemed perfect at the time, not too big, not too small, a decent price, and a quiet neighborhood. The moment I walked in and shut the door, though, I felt something was wrong. It was this heavy, uneasy feeling in my chest, like the house didn't want me there. I brushed it off as moving stress and started unpacking. The very first full day, I went into the kitchen and found one of the upper cabinets wide open. I distinctly remembered closing it earlier. I shut it again and thought maybe the latch was loose. The next day I was in the living room when I heard the cabinet creak open and then shut by itself. I walked in and it was open again. I still kept telling myself it was just an old house thing. That night it got real. I was lying in bed when I heard slow footsteps in the hallway. Not normal walking, slow, dragging steps, like someone sneaking around. They'd stop right outside my bedroom door for what felt like minutes. I live completely alone. No pets, no roommates. I laid there frozen, listening. This happened almost every night after that. Then the nightmares started, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. The first bad one I woke up from, screaming. In the dream I was in my bed, but the room was freezing. I looked up and there was a man hanging from the ceiling right above me, rope around his neck, body swaying. His face was purple and swollen, eyes bulging open, staring straight down at me. His head slowly turned even though his neck was clearly broken, and he opened his mouth like he was trying to say my name. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat. After that, the hanging man was in nearly every nightmare. Sometimes he'd be hanging in the hallway when I tried to run. Sometimes in the kitchen, dripping something dark. One of the worst ones, he was hanging inches above my face, rope creaking, black liquid dripping from his mouth onto me. It burned. I couldn't move. His cold dead fingers brushed my cheek right before I jolted awake. That morning I had 3 fresh scratches across my chest that weren't there when I went to sleep. I got scared enough that I bought a bunch of wooden crosses and hung them up all over the house. One right above my bed, one by the front door, one in the hallway, and one in the kitchen. I'm not even super religious, but I figured it couldn't hurt. It made things worse. A couple nights later I woke up to a loud thump. The cross above my bed was on the floor, turned completely upside down. The nail was still in the wall. I hung it back up straight. The next day the hallway cross was upside down. Then the kitchen one. No matter how many times I fixed them, They'd be inverted again. One afternoon I came home from the store, and every single cross in the house was flipped upside down at the same time. That really shook me. The activity kept escalating. Cabinets would slam so loud it sounded like they were going to break. Footsteps followed me from room to room even during the day. I'd feel ice-cold hands grab my shoulder or brush the back of my neck. The whispers turned into clear voices saying my name and telling me to stay. Sometimes I'd hear laughing, low and nasty, coming from inside the walls. The final straw came one night. I woke up around 3 a.m. to every cabinet in the kitchen slamming open and shut at the same time, super fast, like something was raging. When I got up to check, the hanging man was standing in the hallway, fully visible, rope still around his neck, head tilted at that horrible angle. He wasn't in a dream this time. He took a dragging step toward me. I ran back into my room, locked the door, and didn't come out until daylight. That same morning I found new scratches all over my arms. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear was constant. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, and I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 days later I packed up whatever I could as fast as possible, loaded my car, and got the hell out of there. I didn't even clean the place or give proper notice, I just left the keys on the counter and drove away. My old house was definitely haunted. So I had moved out of my old house not long ago. About 2 months maybe. I now live in a city. But my old house was in the woods and surrounded by trees. It has a bit of a dark history. It was built by my great uncle. My mom's brother was killed in an accidental fire that almost destroyed the house completely. So my first strange encounter happened one late night. It was around 11 or 12 at night, I think. It was dark regardless. So I had to get up and use the bathroom, and I'll give you a layout of the bathroom. So the bathroom has a big mirror that faces the hallway so that you can see yourself when entering. Upon walking towards this, I see something that still haunts me. A literal shadow figure appears for a fraction of a second as it dashes across the image in the mirror. It was a literal shadow figure. I could see the details of a head. Nobody believed me the next morning. Nobody. My next encounter was a bit peculiar. I don't really know what to call it. I had glanced out into the yard one day and saw 2 small floating red orbs that almost looked like eyes just levitating above ground. Like what? I was almost more confused than scared. They glowed pretty intensely too. The eyes or orbs disappeared into the forest shortly. Fast forward again, and we get a very short but strange encounter. I had a sleepover with friends one day, and we all heard the refrigerator door swing open. One other guy and I went to check, and we saw that the door was wide open. Our fridge is magnetically sealed. And no one was there to open it. Yet another encounter. I was awoken sometime late in the night, not sure what time, as I didn't have a clock, to a loud creak in the floorboards. This isn't too strange, though. It's an old house. But it keeps happening, and it almost sounds like footsteps. A consistent creaking getting louder down my hall. Then boom, my entire laptop, which was securely placed on my desk, mind you, falls to the ground. My heart was pumping as I sat up in bed, but the creaking stopped after. Needless to say, sleep was hard to come by that night. Now for the last one, I cannot verify nor comprehend exactly what I saw. Simply put, I could see the face of some humanoid creature peering at me from the woods. This happened when I was very young. There were also some instances when I could hear voices in a room that would stop when I entered. I know this is a lot, but these are spread out among 14 years. Do you have any ideas about what might be causing these experiences in my house? Previously lived in a haunted house. So a few summers ago, I was about 21 years old. I'm 27 now, so this event must have occurred at least 6 years ago. After finishing college, I did what almost every college student does and moved back into my parents' home in the western suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, with no plan of what I was going to do with my life. Now, my parents lived in a split-level style house, and my bedroom growing up was located above the garage. The house was built around the late 1940s, and many people had come and gone since its construction. It was a warm summer day in May, about 12 p.m. or 1 p.m., and I was in my room with my girlfriend at the time, preparing for an interview I had in about an hour. We were the only 2 people home, and we both heard an extremely loud bang noise from beneath our feet, which came from the garage. It was loud enough to shake the floor. At the time, my dad had 2 motorcycles, and the noise was so loud, I was convinced one of the cycles had fallen. It was loud enough that I thought something at least a few hundred pounds heavy had been dropped to the floor. I even remember telling my girlfriend at the time, my dad is going to be pissed. So naturally, I wanted to make sure that everything was okay and also inform him about his motorcycle falling so he didn't have to discover it when he got home from work. I entered the garage, which was completely black, and flipped on a light, but both motorcycles were standing up, with their kickstands down. There were also ladders hanging from the garage ceiling and kayaks, but nothing seemed to be out of place. The floor was completely clear of any debris. At this point, I re-entered my room, finished getting ready, and my girlfriend and I parted ways. About 2 hours later, after finishing my interview, I arrived back home. I couldn't help but shake off what had occurred earlier, and this time, I was the only person home. Both parents were at work, and my girlfriend went back to her mom's house, approximately 30 minutes away. Nobody else lived in the house, and my small dog was sound asleep. I re-entered my room and began changing out of my constricting dress clothes, but grew more and more curious about the noises I had heard beneath my feet. Me being the smart one, I began joking around with myself, saying, "Imagine if I knocked on the floor and it knocked back." So, I decided to try it. Using my foot, I stomped the wood floor of my room twice. I gave it about 2 to 3 seconds of pure silence, and suddenly, bam bam. The floor had knocked back twice at me. It was just as loud as the first two noises, but this time, it happened to be repeating the same knocking pattern I did to the floor. I could tell because each knock/noise had a slight pause in between, exactly like what I did with my foot. I felt the fear start in my feet and spread throughout my body. I was as white as a ghost. I immediately left my room, heading for the kitchen, and I remember placing my back to the corner while I plugged in my phone and attempted to distract myself. I texted my dad and my mom, asking if they were home, and both of them replied that they were working. My girlfriend was about 15 minutes out at this point, and the minute she got to my house, we left. Later in the evening, I searched the garage, and not a single thing was out of place. Nothing had fallen, and nothing explained what the noises were coming from in the garage. We were never able to determine what happened, but it was not the first time something weird happened in that house, and it was not the last. In 2020, my parents finally moved, and since then, we have had nothing unusual happen. I have my own house at this point in my life and have even lived alone for almost 2 years, and all my unusual experiences stopped the minute I left that house. I assure you that every aspect of this story is entirely true, and I did not fabricate any part of it. I also do not use drugs and was not drinking alcohol at the time. Moved into a house that I think may be haunted. In the past few days, 3 different occurrences have taken place, and they are beginning to unsettle me. We've lived here a few weeks, and the first time I was alone in the house on my own, I felt randomly terrified for no good reason whatsoever, which just seemed odd to me. Anyway, the first instance was when my partner and I had just sat down watching TV one evening a few nights ago. We have a cat, and he's a little bugger that likes to scratch up the carpet. We clearly heard this exact noise coming from the hallway right outside the room where we were sitting. I asked my partner why he let the cat into the carpeted rooms. We still had him using a litter tray in the house because we'd not let him out before getting used to the place first, and he was adamant that he hadn't let him in. I checked the kitchen, and there he was, snuggled up on his blanket like nothing had happened. There's no possible way he got through a closed door, into the hallway, and back through said closed door in the 30 seconds that this event unfolded. So God only knows what that was. Literally 20 minutes later, my partner went outside for a smoke, and I went up to bed. About 5 minutes later, he rang me and asked why I'd locked him out. The back door has a standard 5-lever lock with a handle you have to lift up to turn the key to lock it. The keys were in the door on my side, but I absolutely did not lock him out. I have no idea how on earth the handle lifted itself up and the key turned to lock him out. So again, God only knows what that was. Thirdly, about half an hour ago I was outside having a smoke. It's a super calm night with literally no breeze whatsoever. There was a paint pot on the windowsill behind me, and out of the blue, it just fell off. It startled me, and I quickly came back inside. I swear I'm hearing all sorts of random noises now, but I know I'm probably just on high alert. Anyway, I don't know what's going on, but if someone could offer up a plausible explanation that's not the house is haunted, that would be great, 'cause I'm not living in a haunted house, and I have no desire to move again anytime soon. Please, let there be logic, I'm too scared to live with anything else. My aunt's haunted house. I have an aunt that lives in a haunted house. The house was built in the late 1800s. The house has a weird setup. It is technically 2 identical houses conjoined as one big house. According to my mom, the house was owned by 2 women who were twins. With each twin living on their own side, and each side connecting through a staircase in the attic. Legend has it that the twins had an uncle who did bad things to them, which resulted in one of the twins becoming pregnant and having a baby. The other twin ended the baby, ending in both of the twins ending themselves. Weirdly, Almost every family member that has had the misfortune of sleeping over at that house is left with a story to tell. To my dismay, I have on 2 different occasions. The summer after I graduated 8th grade, my older cousin was getting married out of state. Not all the family from our state could go, so just my aunt and I went. We had a very early flight to catch, so she figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house. I asked if I could sleep in her room. When she asked why, I was direct and told her because the house was haunted. As usual, she shrugged it off and angrily disputed that there were no ghosts. She said, "If it will make you feel a little better, you can stay in my room." As night drew near, I went to the bathroom, to the medicine cabinet, and took sleep medicine in hopes it would make me fall asleep before my aunt did. Sure enough, it didn't. My aunt dozed off, and I lay wide awake and scared. I occasionally switched my gaze from the TV to glance at the hallway through the open door. A couple of hours passed and nothing happened. I started to let my guard down and relax a little. I got a little more comfortable in the bed, and, out of nowhere, the closet doorknob started frantically rotating as if someone were trying to get out. I immediately sat up, wide awake and in panic mode. The remaining hours of the night, I stayed awake in fear, watching the closet door. I am not sure who or what was trying to open the closet, but to this day I'm happy it never did. Years later, the summer after I graduated college, I spent the night over her house again. Like the previous time, we were traveling out of town the next day, and my aunt figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house, so we could catch our early flight the next morning. I unhappily obliged. As we retired for the night, I headed to the room where I would be sleeping. It was the room down the hall from my aunt's. I closed the door, put on my PJs, and sat down on the recliner in front of the TV. I had already mentally prepared myself and had expected to stay awake the entire night. The beginning of the night, I browsed the web on my phone to pass time. A couple of hours passed, and nothing happened. As soon as the clock approached 3 a.m., I began to hear what sounded like heeled shoes walking. Whatever it was, it walked up the stairs, down the hall, and stopped right outside the room I was in. I immediately jumped up, went to the heavy daybed in the room, and pushed it in front of the door to prevent whatever it was from opening it. The walking continued, again and again. It would start from the base of the stairs, go up the stairs, and go down the hall, each time stopping right outside the door of the room I was in. Despite barricading the door closed, I was still scared. To lighten up the tense atmosphere, I turned on a channel that had stand-up comedy and tried to watch that, but I was still scared. The walking persisted for the entire hour. Eventually it stopped, but I kept the door barricaded, remained awake, and waited until the morning to open the door. Needless to say, I have not been back to sleep over at my aunt's house and never will. The property next door was purchased by my landlord before he bought the land I'm currently on. There used to be an abandoned camper, mobile home, and barn over there. Every time I went over there I felt so uneasy. Their things were still in all those buildings, like they had to grab what they could and get out. The property I'm on makes me uneasy too. Part of it is in the valley, and there's a creek down there. It felt like there was a barrier at night, and I did my best to stay away from them. I kept getting flashes of things happening there, like a baptism, and it went even further back than that. We discovered a pair of boots and an old scarecrow upon our arrival here, and I would prefer not to recall what else we encountered. At night, one would hear footsteps immediately outside the door of my uncle's old office building, which was essentially just a metal shed, yet no one would be present. I saw and felt a lot of weird things, and I'm honestly grateful to be moving in 2 weeks. This is in SC. I lived in Arizona for 8 years, and let me tell you, that entire state does not function the way it should spiritually. I'm sure you've heard of towns disappearing and appearing, but I saw some awful things while living in a specific apartment. One apartment had something bad wrong with it. One time I looked in there, and it was covered in blood, and a girl was hanging, wearing a white nightgown. Covered in blood. It was awful. I heard a voice telling me to go, even though I was alone. I saw knives hanging from the stairs in the shadows. I avoided that one at all costs, going the long way around. In my apartment, across the way from it, weird shit happened too. One of my rats got loose in my brother's room, and his friend was there. We went back in to look for my rat again and saw its head lying there. It turned and made an awful noise and had bright red eyes. We ran back to my room, waiting, and went back in, and there my rat was in the middle of the floor. Whole. Like nothing happened. Another time, my youngest brother, my mom, the neighbor's girl, and I were watching a haunting together. My little bro had fallen asleep and suddenly sat straight up with bloodshot eyes and said, "I didn't do it." Not to all of them. Not all of them. Needless to say, we shut the TV off. Same complex, Different apartment. The ghost of a man who had a crush on my mom and had ended his girlfriend and himself years ago appeared to me. He wasn't bad, but he scared me at first. He stuck around for a while, but it's been a long time since I've heard from him. He was the most pleasant ghost I have ever experienced, to be honest. But I'm glad he's finally at peace because he was just full of sorrow and regret. Before he died, he fell into a bad situation, and his girlfriend introduced him to drugs, which severely affected him. Anyway, that's all I can remember right now. My only advice is trust your gut and do not mess with Arizona, or it will mess with you. I think my late grandmother is haunting the house my family is living in. For some context, my grandmother died in January of this year. She died because she took a bad fall and broke her hip. My grandfather was her caregiver because she had Alzheimer's. Her death was devastating for my mom, grandfather, my grandmother's niece, and me. My mom and I had to move in with my grandfather because he stopped caring for himself after her death. He stopped eating and lost a lot of weight in a couple of weeks. When we first moved in, I noticed there was a strange but comforting feeling around me. I felt at ease and relaxed, I just didn't know why. I lived there before when I was finishing up high school but had never felt anything like that before. I saw a person out of the corner of my eye who was about my grandmother's height. At times, she would engage in activities such as walking past me while I was cooking. She used to observe my grandfather cook, examining books on the shelf in the family room, or observing birds. Things that I know my grandma liked to do. This has been going for about 5 months now. I think I'm the only person who noticed that she's still here, and the thought both makes me happy and a little sad. I had hoped that she would be able to move on once she saw that Grandpa was being cared for. I guess I'm just asking what other people's thoughts are. The little girl on the 3rd floor. For a little geography, I grew up in a small rural community in the foothills of western North Carolina and still live there. So this story begins when I, male, 62, was only 13, just a kid riding his bike. I would ride my bike down the street. As I approached the old, run-down, dilapidated 3-story Victorian mansion, my stomach would knot with dread. My legs went faster and faster until I was well past the overgrown vine-covered structure. Fast forward. Now I'm 18 and in high school. The mansion has now been remodeled and is a historic location and a museum. A Charlotte TV station does a story for Halloween and lists it as one of the most haunted locations in North Carolina. For one of my classes we take a tour of the mansion. Originally constructed as a 2-story residence for a wealthy eccentric diamond dealer, he was unsatisfied with the lack of impressiveness of the home and literally had workmen saw the house in half, jack up the top floor, and build a 2nd floor in between to now have a 3-story home. There are photos of this construction process in the museum. During our tour we had a psychic medium with us. When we were on the 3rd floor, she became physically ill and overwhelmingly sad, saying this room was a place of great sadness and that someone had been held against their will here for many years. Noting this one particular room still had locks on the outside of the 2 doors that access the room. The windows also had locks on the outside. This kind of validated the psychic's account for us. Fast forward another 6 years and now I am a deputy for the county sheriff. The mansion constantly has alarm violations. There are almost never any entry sensor alarms, but there are always interior motion alarms on the 2nd or 3rd floor. The mansion has an extensive collection of vintage and antique dolls. I have responded as many as 5 to 6 times a night. Never. Not once have I or any other officers had an actual break-in. Go at 10 p.m., and everything is in order as it should be, go back at 3 a.m., and dolls are on the floor, removed from locked glass cases, and the cases are still locked. Cold spots where you could see your breath and the hair on the back of your neck and arms stand up on hot summer nights. This literally goes on year after year. All the officers knew that the mansion was haunted. Then, on a cold winter night, one of my part-time reserve officers responded to a call at the mansion because he was facing a very long and boring 12-hour shift. The officer clears before I arrive at the mansion and requests a meeting at a small country grocery store parking lot. Now mind you, this officer was part-time, and as we would say, for his real job, he was a professional pilot and flew very large cargo jets all of his adult life. He said he just became a deputy sheriff because it was a lifelong dream, and he helped us part-time to fill in. We were a small agency in a small county. He looked kind of shook up. I asked him what was wrong. He seemed a little unnerved. He said, "Have you ever seen anything down at the mansion? I mean, anything odd?" I said, "Well, other than the usual dolls being moved, cold spots, and unexplainable alarm activation, not really." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, never mind, it's nothing." I said, "Go on, you can't just leave me hanging. What happened?" He asked me if I'd ever seen anything on the third floor unusual. I told him no, but I certainly had felt uneasy on the second and third floors. He said tonight he pulled up and got out of his patrol car and was shining his maglite around when he saw a young girl, probably about 12 to 13 years old, who was just standing there staring at him. She was holding the drapes to the right open with her right hand. He said after what seemed like forever, she just stepped backward, and the drapes closed. He was very shaken by this and would often avoid answering an alarm call at the mansion if he could. Fast forward again, about 2 years later, and now it's my turn. It was a cold, quiet night, about 2 a.m. Alarm call, motion on the third floor, a call I've probably gotten hundreds of times before. I pull in and cut on my alley light, a very bright side light in the bar lights on top of my patrol car. My usual routine when I respond to an alarm call at the mansion is to cut on my alley light and circle the entire building one complete round while using my flashlight to focus on doors and windows. After I'd made a complete circle, then I would park, walk up to the doors, and physically inspect them to see if I had an insecure entry point. Not tonight, though. As I pull in and start past the south-facing side of the building, I have my alley light on, and I'm looking out the driver's side window of my patrol car with my maglite. I start on a bottom floor and very quickly shine across the building, looking from door to door and window to window until I reach the third floor, and that's when I freeze. There, on the third floor, at the second window, is where she stood. A pretty young girl with very long wavy hair wearing an early 1900s style dress with lace up and down to the right and left of the buttons. Her hair on the right side was draped in front, and the left was back behind her left shoulder. I could see her right arm, holding the curtain back about 12 inches, just looking out at me. It seemed like I sat there and looked at her forever, but in reality, it was probably only a few seconds, and just as quickly as I had seen her, she was gone. She stepped back into the darkness, and the curtain swayed from where she had released it. I can actually say a chill ran up and down my spine for a few moments. I definitely had the heebie-jeebies. I did search the house because that was what I was supposed to do. I might tell you that I searched it quickly and I found nothing unusual. I cleared my mind that night and never told anyone for a very long time about what I had seen. Probably a year or two later I was working with a reserve officer again. We pulled up to talk one night, and I said, "You know, I never told you, but I saw her, just standing there looking out the window in her dress with all the ruffles and lace. Just staring, not moving, not blinking, nothing at all. Then she just stepped back and was gone." He said, "You know, that place gives me the creeps, and there's just something not right about it." We talked a bit longer, and I agreed it certainly did give me the creeps too. Over the years other officers saw her looking out the third floor window, never smiling, never waving, just looking, and then she would be gone. The incident is a true story, although I don't know that there are many who would admit to it. I retired in 2015. I never saw her again. That was the one and only time she chose to reveal herself to me. Many years have passed, and the sheriff's office still gives out alarm calls at the museum, mostly motion detected on the second or third floor. Think my house is haunted. I am a 15-year-old male and a firm believer in ghosts and similar phenomena. I moved into my house when I was 8 years old, and it seemed like a normal house, but I felt like I'd been there before. I knew where and what everything was, and everything was super familiar, even though I'd never set foot in that house. A few months later I had dreams of me wandering the house. These dreams probably don't mean anything, but every couple nights I would get a dream of me wandering the house, and these dreams felt like hours. In these dreams, I never felt alone, and whenever I turned my head, I would see something peeking at me. The dreams stopped after a while, but I always felt like I wasn't alone in a room. My dogs would bark at corners in the house, and my older sister claimed to feel something living in her room. Nothing really happened in the house until a couple of years ago. When I was 13, I always thought I heard whispering whenever I was alone in the house. I've always been paranoid, so I thought it was just in my head. Then I saw shadows when no one was around. Objects, like balls, would roll on their own. I thought it was just wind moving them, but the dogs would come up and bark at something next to the ball. Other objects would be in a different place, like stuffed animals or a TV remote. I also heard running and footsteps sometimes, always running to my location in the house. I would try and tell my family about all this stuff, but only my older sister believed me. The stuff that I was seeing never happened to her, but she could feel a presence in her room at times. One of the weirdest experiences occurred when I moved into the room downstairs. The room in our basement is the biggest room in our house, and since I'm the last kid living at home, my parents decided to give it to me. There is a back door down there that connects to a dog area that I keep locked because it makes me feel safe. Sometimes I'll exit through that door to pick up dog poop or something different. Usually, I will secure the door again, but I have forgotten to do so approximately a dozen times. When I do forget to lock the door, and I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I'll hear this sort of tapping. The tapping only happens when the door is unlocked. Initially, the tapping appears to originate from outside. However, when I rise and approach the door to investigate, it seems as though the tapping is emanating from a different location. When I lock the door, the tapping stops immediately. I don't know if this is some reminder telling me to lock the door or something else entirely. Keep in mind, most of this stuff happens when I'm alone. It only happens to me, and if I am with someone and I hear whispers or footsteps, no one else can hear it. I don't know if this is a friendly ghost or something malicious, but it hasn't hurt anyone. But if it is, either it's targeting me since I'm the only one to whom this happens or something else is going on. This house is also fairly new and has had only one other family, but no one in that family died. My sister says it could be the ghost of my biological dad. I am adopted, and he passed away when I was a baby, but I don't think it's him. Thoughts about this whole ordeal? Any sort of info on this would be most appreciated. Living in an old house has traumatized me for life. I've never really been a believer in the paranormal, I'm still not, but I have no explanation for what's going on with my house. I moved into an old fixer-upper 10 years ago when I was 6 years old. I didn't like the house before I even stepped in the front door. It was a foreclosure, covered in weeds and vines, paint was peeling off the sides. The history of the house didn't help either. It once belonged to a doctor that did in-house appointments. I'm not sure if people died there. All around haunted house material. It only got worse when I went inside. I immediately ran outside and vomited in the front yard due to the overwhelming scent of rot in the house. I mustered up the courage to go back in and then felt extremely uncomfortable, so I left again and waited for my parents and sister to return. I begged my family not to buy this house, but they didn't listen. Since it was a project house, we didn't move in right away, we had to work on it for a couple of months. This led to countless hours of tearing up carpet and fixing floorboards. When we took up the carpet in the master bedroom, there were black footprints that walked right into a wall, and my father, who doesn't believe in ghosts whatsoever, swears that one night while they're alone, a red ball came rolling out of the guest room up an incline. We didn't have anything in that room. He left the house immediately. Things got even weirder when we moved in. At night we would hear thumping in the attic that was too loud to be a raccoon or rodent and what sounded like running in the living room. I swear that I once heard laughter from the den. There are a few things that still scare me to this day. I have a small carousel horse wind-up music box. It's very old and takes a while to get started. I woke up in the middle of the night to it playing for a solid couple minutes. That would take a lot of winding. Other occurrences included my large dogs barking at my closet and a guest claiming that a woman pulled the sheets over her. It was nothing super concerning. Perhaps the most terrifying thing that ever happened was something I saw. It was a man in a red plaid shirt in my room. I tried to ignore it but didn't sleep at all. The next morning I told my mother the story. Her face went white. Apparently my sister told her the exact same thing just days before. We're all still puzzled by who or what the plaid man is. Things have calmed down a lot recently, no more visions or loud noises. My dog still hates my room, and there are some minor things here and there, but nothing like when I was a child. Was the hallway in my childhood home haunted? I experienced something in my childhood home that I still can't explain to this day. My mom, sister, and I lived in this house from when I was 4 until I moved out as an adult. I had 2 experiences in this house, and this is the first one. To get to the kitchen or back door, you had to walk through the dining room and a small hallway. Around the age of 12, I suddenly began to feel very uneasy in this hallway, particularly at night or when I was alone. I had never been afraid of this house before, even in the dark, and couldn't explain why this hallway just suddenly made me feel so uncomfortable. The main problem with this was that we had 2 small dogs who slept in my room at night, and it had become my responsibility to let them out into our fenced-in backyard for one last potty break every night before I went to bed. This meant that I had to let them out on my own when it was dark, and to do this, I had to walk through this hallway to reach the back door. I started turning on every light leading up the hallway, then letting the dogs out and running back to the dining room to wait for a few minutes. Then I would let them back in, lock the door, turn off the lights, and run back to my room. I couldn't walk through this hallway in the dark without feeling like I was in a great deal of danger, even though it had never bothered me in the past. This feeling grew over the course of several months. I tried to talk to my mom about it, but she said I was being silly and it was all in my head. It eventually got so bad that I couldn't force myself to go back there alone at night to let the dogs out, and I started taking them out into our, unfenced, front yard instead. I wasn't supposed to be doing that at all, But standing outside alone in the dark with the possibility of getting into tons of trouble with my mom was a way better option than walking into that hallway. The feeling of fear was just so intense there that I was terrified. I had also stopped wanting to go there during the day, which meant that I also couldn't get into the kitchen. I started just choosing to be hungry because I refused to go in there to feed myself. My mother would occasionally prepare meals but had no qualms about informing us, "It's left overnight, heat something up," or simply allowing us to have cereal. But as the feeling grew, even during the day I was too afraid to go through the hallway to the kitchen, so sometimes on the weekends or evenings I just didn't eat. Fortunately, I was able to have breakfast and lunch at school, so I was not experiencing hunger or anything of that nature. This went on for about a month, and then one morning it changed. I was getting ready for school, my sister was still asleep, and my mom was in the kitchen. I heard my mom scream my name, and the way she yelled for me made my stomach drop. I panicked. I thought she must have cut off a finger or something. I ran straight to the kitchen, figuring it was an emergency. When I got there, she was just standing there looking at the kitchen door that I had just walked through, with her face completely white. I asked what was wrong, and she didn't really answer. She asked me if anyone had been in there, and I replied no, since my sister was asleep and I had been on the other side of the house. I was super confused at this point. She said that she had been packing her lunch and had turned around and seen someone standing in the hallway through the kitchen door. To this day, she won't tell me who or what she saw. If I bring it up, she claims not to remember, but her behavior and the speed at which she changes the subject lead me to believe that she does remember and simply doesn't want to discuss it. She wouldn't tell me at the time either. Now, the really odd thing is, I was never afraid of that hallway again. You'd think that after knowing my mom saw something that had her so upset, I would be even more afraid, but to be honest, I just felt a little smug about it. I had told her there was something in that hallway. And after she saw it, the feeling totally disappeared. It was almost like the energy or whatever built until it made itself seen, and then it was gone. Until I moved out of that house as an adult, I was never afraid of that hallway or anywhere else in the house again, even though I had just spent months so afraid of it that I wouldn't even go through it to feed myself. I still don't know why this happened or what it was, but I don't think I'll ever forget it. They think I'm crazy. I'm 21 years old now, but this happened when I was younger. My family and I walked into our new house and started looking around, and my 3 sisters instantly ran upstairs to go pick their rooms, but I was still walking with my mother and father in the kitchen just to see how the kitchen and dining room looked, but my mother told me to go upstairs and look for what room I wanted, so I started running upstairs, happy to find my room, but on my way up I saw my 3 sisters standing at the top of the stairs all together, just quietly looking straight ahead. I get to the top with them and see this black figure hunched over. It had no face and no legs, that I could see, it was just a black cloaked figure. Then all of a sudden it ran to the middle room and shut the door, and they all ran downstairs to tell our parents, but I just stood there to make sure it didn't run out. Then my father ran up the stairs and saw the direction that I was looking in and ran into the room, and I followed him just to find out that the room was completely vacant with no traces of escape or any evidence of anything being in there. After that, our parents agreed that we should all sleep in the same room, which was my mother's room. I remember us all getting ready to go to sleep and me being the last one to go to sleep. And as soon as I closed my eyes, I dreamt that I was observing all of us sleeping from the corner. I couldn't move at all, I could only just stand there and watch from the corner. Then all of a sudden I was able to look down at my hands, and it wasn't my hands. It was long and black with long nails. And all of a sudden it forced me to look up at me, and I charged it. I recall waking up to see that the room wasn't empty. It was full of people and even the ambulance. I was asking what was the matter and how everyone got here, but they were only telling me that I had been screaming the whole time. They didn't let me explain myself. They just picked me up on the carrier and brought me to the car, but on my way out I saw that thing in the corner. And the weirdest part is that no one remembers seeing that thing and says that they don't know what I was talking about. I need answers. I used to be a network technician working for local government in the UK. The offices were a maze of very old buildings, built in the 16th century, ERK. A colleague and I were making some changes to network switches that needed to be completed after hours, following the evening backups, because the process involved dropping links and rebooting. It was about 2/3 of the way through the night, and we were nearing completion. My colleague was working in another part of the site while I was in the MDF room, tapping away at a switch configuration. The MDF happened to be next door to the old condemned cell, where criminals were kept the night before they were taken outside and hanged. As I was working, I heard footsteps walking down the corridor. I shouted out, thinking it was my colleague. No response. I got up and stuck my head around the door. There was no one there. I phoned him, and he confirmed he was still at the other side of the site. I returned to work, and once more, I heard footsteps along with the sound of a heavy door opening and closing. I called out, but again, nothing. After another 10 minutes or so, I heard the footsteps again. This time the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt as if I were being watched. I heard a noise in my ear, like a loud, wheezy woo-woo-er, as if someone were breathing into my ear. I quickly confirmed that I could remote into the switch. Saved the config and got the heck out of there. I learnt sometime afterwards that they used to use the condemned cell for file storage but had to stop as the files kept getting rearranged. 2 encounters. Around the early 1980s, I saw 2 ghosts in 2 different apartments when I lived in the French Quarter, New Orleans. The first apartment was on the bottom floor. It was a 1-bedroom with a big living room. My sister, best friend, stayed in the bedroom, and I slept on a mattress on the floor in the living room. One day, I had been at work and had got off around 7 or 8 at night. I got home, ate something and took a shower. The bathroom was in her room. Then I went and lay down. I was lying there, unable to fall asleep, when I saw a woman in a black Victorian dress walk from one end of the house to the other. I called out my friend's name, but there was no reply. I put my head under my blanket for about 5 minutes. When I looked again, she was standing over me. I quickly put the covers back over my head and didn't get out until morning. I told my friend about the encounter, and she said she had heard a woman moaning or screaming, but she never saw her. I never saw her after that night. To this day I sleep with the blanket over my head. My second apartment we lived in was a loft apartment with 2 bedrooms. At different times, I would sit on my bed and think that one of our cats was coming to sit behind me, but I never saw any of them when I looked. Sometimes we put things on the living room table, but they ended up in our room or on the floor. One night my sister's boyfriend came over to take us all to the movies. My sister's boyfriend and I were sitting on the end of her bed when we saw a man in blue work khakis and a plaid shirt walk from the living room into my room. We both looked at each other, and then he went to my room to see who it was. There was no one there. My sister suspects that one of the slaves owned by Marie Delphine McCarty, also known as Madame Blanc or Madame La Laurie, was responsible. She was a New Orleans socialite and killer who ended slaves in her household. Her house was around the corner from where we lived. After that incident, my sister was hospitalized for about a month. Yep, I had to stay there by myself. He never hurt anyone, so I wasn't too scared. Shortly after she got out of the hospital, we moved out of the French Quarter. I never saw another ghost since I left LA until I moved to South Carolina in 2009. I moved in with another friend, who I met in New Orleans. She lived in a 4-bedroom home with her husband and brother-in-law. I was in my room asleep when I awoke to a woman standing at the end of my bed. She looked really angry. I wanted to sit up and scream, but I was paralyzed and couldn't move. This happened a few more times. My friend told me it was a woman who died in the house. I have my own place and would see things out of the corner of my eye or feel someone/something touch me. My daughter and my grandsons live with me now. I still see and feel things, but not as much. A house truly haunted. I got married in 2012. We moved into our first house. It wasn't, per se, old. It fit the homes in the neighborhood. Nevertheless, from the first night I spent there, I could sense something wasn't right. Choosing to watch Lovely Molly that first night didn't help either. I just always had an eerie feeling like something or someone was near me. At night I began to hear footsteps in my wife's makeup room. I'd sometimes go upstairs to see why she was pacing for so long and always found her asleep in the bed. At one point, I entered the makeup room late at night. A black crayon we didn't even own rolled across the floor from some dark corner of the room, the corner that was always darker than the rest and the one I felt eyes coming from. Fast forward 1 month. A bunch of friends were over for my wife's friend's birthday. We watched a scary movie in the dark. After we shut off all the lights, TV, and everything, my ex started talking about how I thought the place was haunted and how she believed it to be BS. Just at that moment, directly behind her friend, a framed, propped up picture of us fell forward onto the table. Not fallen, but more like angrily slapped. Everyone shrieked. And then we all laughed. I laughed too, but more so to give off the impression that I wasn't scared. We got married and moved into our house in September 2012. In October, I started having what I thought were strokes. At the time, I was using a supplement which contained something called 1,3-dimethylamine hydrochloride. Basically, a fancy way to say meth without the FDA breathing down their necks. It was called Jack 3D. I'm sure many of you exercise freaks remember it. The doctors figured that was my problem and told me to stop. So, I did. The panic attacks persisted. I went to the ER 11 times and saw 7 cardiologists. Funny thing is, these attacks only occurred in that house. It reached a point where even my ex would remark, "You know, I can have a wonderful day, but the moment I enter this house, I feel terrible." I took that as maybe she was just feeding off of my negativity, and I agreed. Something in there wasn't happy with us. We shouldn't have been there. The rest is short and concise. It had been months. Maybe 4. Things would fall off the wall. We had a plate attached to some hooks in the wall which said something about how a home is only a home with love or some Hallmark bullshit. It was thrown halfway across the room. It shattered. We'd come home to find pictures all over the floors. Toilet paper unraveled. Her explanation of this was that our 4-pound teacup Pomeranian did it. No way. He stood on his ducking hind legs for a minute straight and unraveled a roll of TP that was far too high up for him anyway. And those footsteps, those incessant footsteps. Never ending. The most horrifying moment was in late winter. My puppy was in my lap, and something caused him to stand at attention. His muscles were tense and solid as concrete, unmoving, tail pointed to the ceiling. I heard the footsteps again, only this night they were especially active. I felt that the sanctity of our house was truly threatened. Henry growled, just as the steps moved from the room to the hallway and then down the stairs into the living room.
I didn't even try to look.
I grabbed Henry, and we ran out the front door, where we watched the monolithic bricked entity leer down at us with its foreboding second-story windows resembling eyes and a yawning, aghast mouth serving as a door. Desperation. The basement was the worst part of the house. We both were terrified of it, and she would never go down there without me. Finally, we got what we were waiting for. Irrefutable proof before both of our eyes that something not of this earth was with us and that we needed to leave. Her stepdad and mom came over. My stepdad-in-law sat on the couch watching football. They were in the kitchen. We had a hanging plant in the dining room. Mind you, as this was all occurring, we had the front door open so some air could get in through the glass screen door. So, she's chatting with her mom about whatever. Suddenly, the flower pot began swinging. I mean swinging. Very forceful. I swear, even the wind from a horrible thunderstorm couldn't have got it to do this. My ex yelled out my name. I walked in and watched. Back and forth. Back and forth. Something was pushing it. Finally, her mother had enough, and being the tough woman she was a captain at a jail. After all, she screamed, "Whoever you are, you need to leave this house. It no longer belongs to you." The swing slowly halted to a stop. When I turned around, the front door was slowly shutting on its own. No breeze, no wind. It didn't shut all the way, but just that creaky sound is enough to give anyone the heebie-jeebies. Within a few weeks, things started to get better. Happier. But it didn't stay that way. It started all over again. Only much fiercer and uglier. The moment that made us consider really moving again was one night in the kitchen. We were making something, and suddenly, there was knocking on the wall. No joke. I have no other way to put it. Literal knocking. Not hard or angry. Very quaint. Like a Jehovah's Witness. It scared us so much I almost spilt a pan full of burning grease all over me. The negativity came back. The footsteps came back. And that basement was akin to walking into a rung of hell. We moved out after a year. After we left, I drove past that house a few times. Didn't notice anything. Except once. I slowly crept by and pulled over in front one evening. It wasn't light or dark. Almost dusk. I was staring at something in the living room window. Curtains, perhaps. Something caught my eye. Then, one of the curtains brushed aside, and I saw a face. My heart skipped, and I was frozen. I actually jumped in my seat. No lights on inside. This is no BS. I looked closely. It may sound funny now, but it wasn't then. It looked like someone who was in the Revolutionary War. The entity had white hair, like an old powdered wig, a painting from the 18th century. Just like the wig that Washington has on in all of his portraits. It looked at me still. Very, very still and rigid. I couldn't make out much of the face, nor the eyes, which looked like little black buttons. Its expression was very droll. Like the way your white-haired grandmother would give a child the death stare for stealing out of the cookie jar. Kind of like, "You do that again, you're in for it." Eerily, it gave me a look like it recognized me and was telling me, "Don't come near this house." I put the car in drive, and we watched each other as I drove away. I drove away from a house that had no cars in the driveway and a "for sale" sign on the lawn. I went home and told her. She said I was lying. That was, until 3 years later. Her cousin's friend, who lived on that very street, aptly named Washington Avenue, told her that people would frequent that home and move out quickly. She never connected the dots. She said it was because there were projects not far down that road. I knew otherwise. All these years later, it spooks the hell out of me that we were in there with that thing I saw the entire time. Why didn't it show itself to me before? If we had seen it before moving in, we would not have moved in. To this day, that year was one of the most powerful, disturbing points of my life. I'd also like to note that in the house I grew up in, which is the place where my dad died, I literally saw his ghost sitting in his favorite living room chair in the middle of the night. I'd never been so scared. This experience was far more terrifying than anything I had ever encountered before. Haunting. Harmless or mimic? I want to start by saying I knew full well when we moved into this house that it was haunted. I told my husband that a little boy, a little girl, and an old woman had died in a fire here, which was later confirmed by his firefighter buddy who had pulled their bodies out of the fire years ago. There is also a man here who stays mostly in my furnace room but sometimes ventures out and is more intimidating. Anyway, about 2 years ago, I heard incessant loud knocking on our front door. I work from home, and we live in a nice area. I thought it was a neighbor. We have a few that are elderly, that may have needed help. I opened the door, but no one was there. Immediately my cat started freaking out, and I felt a heavy presence that was not there before. Ever since that incident, the activity in the house has changed. We still get things peeking around corners at us or things being moved. But now we can hear each other at home, even if the person we hear is not there or is asleep. I will hear my husband or son speaking to me through the office door or gently knocking when no one is present in the house. My husband will hear me or one of our kids when we're either not home/sleeping or in a completely different area of the house or outside. My son will hear us call for him or knock, but neither we nor the other kids have called him or been by his room. Recently he's been afraid to sleep in his room due to things moving and knocking on his wall/door. I'm unsure how to handle things moving forward. I'm not open to saging. Someone has saged our home before and left all the windows closed, and activity ramped up tenfold. I grew up around a haunted hotel, the Brook Forest Inn, Evergreen, Company. I wish I were kidding, but growing up in Evergreen, Colorado, is weird. The place is called Brook Forest, and there is an inn there with the same name. Ghosts are par for the course if you live near history, and well, Brook Forest is as old as Evergreen itself. So, as a kid of 6, Brook Forest Inn was and always has been my adventure spot. It was built in 1909 and stood up to a lot of things, but as a kid, my experience actually was kind of small compared to others who had seen the ghost, Jessica, or the child. The owner's daughter was the only one who ever bothered me. The owner, whose name I could never remember, actually let us play on the second floor, which was where all the hotel rooms were. They were being renovated, and there was only one working bathroom, which was a master bedroom room at the far end away from the stairs. My sister, the owner's daughter, and I were running around upstairs playing a game, hide and seek. I got bored and went downstairs. My sister said she'd be down in a few minutes and had to go to the bathroom. I was the third step up from the bottom of the stairs when I felt a sharp push. It felt like an adult was shoving me out of the way, and I fell. My father and a biker saw me fall, and I heard my father yelling at my sister, blaming her. This is strange because my sister came down about 10 minutes later. I still asked how my sister could have pushed me when she was in the bathroom on the other side of the building. Never got my answers. I later learned a bit of history about the Brook Forest Inn and why many adults did not speak about it. There was a suicide and murder in the hotel and also a death of a child from the 1914 pandemic. I was not surprised because I often played with a little boy growing up whom other kids cruelly called Casper. I never had a name for the child other than the little boy in the ballroom. I was a lonely kid with a learning disability who had few friends, and to me, the little boy was there. I never saw him again after we moved in 1990. I miss the Brook Forest Inn and still wish I could see it again. I am now 39, and the hotel has changed hands so many times. Strange encounters in my apartment. About a year ago my grandmother passed away, and my mom has her urn and ashes in her room now. I never experienced anything paranormal in my life until my grandmother's ashes were put in our home, but I do not think it is her causing the activity. About 2 or 3 months after she passed, weird things started happening in my room. Objects would fall over unexpectedly, and I would get strange feelings of someone standing right in front of me, but there would be no one. As if I were staring into eyes that weren't there. This stayed at this level for a while. However, it started happening less when I was alone and more when I was with people or had company in my room. It wasn't just small objects either. At one point I had 5 people in my room, and my skateboard, which, mind you, was put up well, I know this wasn't on my end, fell over in a very awkward manner. If it was gravity making this skateboard fall, It would have looked a bit different, but it looked like it was almost shoved down violently. The people in my room with me at the time got up and left my house, and I can't even lie, they haven't come back to my house once since. This continued and happened multiple times in front of multiple people. My girlfriend is one, and another is my best friend Nick. One night Nick had decided to come over, and we were running some split-screen zombies on my Xbox. We were pretty far into the game when, out of nowhere, my Black Ops 3 disc ejects from the Xbox and quits our game. At the time, Nick hadn't seen anything scary happen in my house, but I had told him, and he was skeptical. Well, not anymore because Nick was actually traumatized. He brings it up every time we hang out now. Neither of us were near my Xbox. I had no animals in the room, and let me also add my Xbox is a Series S, which has buttons you have to actually click in, not a touchscreen. Something had to have physically touched that eject button, and I still don't know what. After this incident, activity in my house got bad. Doors would slam, random large objects around my house would fall, and I would see large black figures out of the corner of my eye in the doorways, shit that was starting to make me uncomfortable. The thing is, at first I was welcome to a little paranormal activity from Nana, as I'm a pretty witchy person, and that doesn't bother me. Communicating with a deceased loved one is fascinating and doesn't bother me at all. However, this particular presence was beginning to feel less like my Nana, and I was becoming unnerved by it because it started to convey a more sinister vibe. About a week after doors start slamming in my house, I'm hanging out with some friends in my room, and my girlfriend asks me why there is a handprint on my ceiling. This instantly made my heart drop, and when I looked up, there was a dark black smudged handprint right above my bed, where I ducking sleep at night. This was no ordinary handprint, as it was bigger than my hand, and I have a decent sized hand. All of the fingertips were spread out, almost as if whatever was left had been crawling on my ceiling like Spider-Man. I'm a very clean person, and I did not leave that handprint above my bed. It took my using bleach to wash it off. I scrubbed as hard as I could with water and nothing. This is what led me to believe this wasn't my grandmother anymore, and now I need more information as to what this could be. The activity in my house has slowed down since I found the handprint. After the incident, I spoke very loudly and sternly in my room, demanding that whatever left the handprint leave immediately, as it was not welcome here. Since I did this, I haven't had anything particularly aggressive happen towards me, but my doors still shut themselves at weird moments, and I still feel the presence of things when I'm standing in my kitchen cooking or I'm in bed going to sleep. The only possible explanation for what this entity is, at least in my view, is that it is something connected to my grandmother's father. I've heard many stories about him being very weird. Like one of my aunts told me, she stayed with my grandmother once for a sleepover and, at 2 o'clock in the morning, walked in on my great-grandfather completely naked, reading the Bible, standing in the dark. I'm not sure if this energy is his presence or if something is attached to him. My grandmother was very religious, and for something evil to attach itself to her would be odd. I'm not sure, but I need answers as to what this energy in my house is. During undergrad, I worked at the largest teaching hospital in the state in the radiology film library, basically what you'd expect, a warehouse-like area holding rows and rows of patient film jackets that would be checked out for care or updates. I loved the night shift because there wasn't a lot of work, it paid time and a half, and I could put on headphones and just file mindlessly for hours. The hall between the radiology department and the film library had a series of doors into private reading rooms where a person like myself would hang films on the light boxes, and radiologists, and often other physicians, would go in to read them and discuss what they saw. There were 6 of these walk-in closet-sized rooms in total, all numbered and kept clean and clear of clutter so you could lend them out to doctors who needed to read a film. It was important to keep the doors open when free and closed when in use for both privacy and knowing which rooms were available. It was a regular occurrence for me and other staff members to walk that hall and find all the doors shut when no one was around, let alone in the rooms. During the years I worked there, I experienced this phenomenon of doors closing on their own over 24 times. I would walk to the library, notice every door open, and then moments later find them all closed, without ever hearing the sound of closing doors or encountering anyone in the hall. We would then have to knock politely and check to see if someone had gone in to use them, and almost always, during the graveyard shift, they were empty. No big deal, it could be explained by a custodian or security guard shutting them because they didn't know better, except they did know better, and none of them ever admitted to shutting the doors. The closed doors were not what would freak me and the other staff members out. Before each of us knocked on the door to check if the little room was in use, we would listen, as one typically does outside a room to determine if it is occupied. Everyone had a story of hearing someone or something inside before opening the door to find the room empty. My coworkers would talk about hearing a person humming a tune or a muffled one-sided conversation, like someone talking on the phone. It was common for a staff member to hear her come in. After knocking, only to open the door to find no one there. I never heard a voice, but there were several times where I heard the very distinct sound of someone flipping through the thick radiographs, clipping film to the light boards, yanking them down, and shuffling papers. Each time I was genuinely surprised when I would knock, open the door, and find an empty darkened room. These experiences were so common that it was just kind of understood by radiology staff members that the hallway was especially creepy and that maybe you shouldn't hang out there. However, medical staff from the rest of the hospital were down there less frequently and were always totally alarmed when they had an experience. Residents would complain that they felt like someone was behind them, reading over their shoulder when they sat in those rooms. Others would hear "Doctor?" like someone was about to ask them a question but turn around to find they were alone in the hall. The sheer number of rational, professional, scientific-minded people who would talk about their experiences even in the short time I was there was quite impressive. It's still a working hospital, otherwise, I would expect to see it on some sort of ghost hunting type show. I just remembered that time my sister and I got haunted, so I decided I wanted to share it. This happened a few years ago, I don't remember when exactly, but I think I was in 5th grade, for the second time because I flunked, but that's beside the point, so I'm assuming it was in 2022. Back then my sister used to love annoying me and scaring me, and this was no different. She decided it would be a good idea to make up a fake person in her head and pretend to be talking to her to creep me out, and so she started talking to this Julia. She would talk to her like she was her best friend, and I would tell her, "Who are you talking to, you idiot?" And she'd say, "I'm talking to Julia, she's literally right there. Don't you see her?" Now, I know she was lying and not actually seeing someone, but I'll get to that later. Anyways, she would keep pretending to talk to this Julia, and one day I got annoyed and pretended to launch at her and started punching the air in the spot where she was supposedly sitting, according to my sister. And then that was that. Now a few days later, I had this dream. I'm not going to get into too much detail about the dream itself because it's not important and it was just plain weird, but there was this huge treehouse in the middle of nowhere, and I went inside, and inside there was nothing. No furniture, no walls, no decoration, nothing but the house and this random girl. The girl was white, had long, slightly wavy dark brown hair, and always kept her back turned to me, preventing me from seeing her face. When I asked her, "What's your name?" she replied that her name was Julia. Just a coincidence. Right? This probably happened because I've been interacting with Julia a lot. Right? Wrong. I woke up and immediately went to tell my sister everything about the dream and told her about Julia and asked her if she looked like that, and my sister was creeped out and said Julia wasn't real and she made her up, like I didn't know, and we just didn't talk about it again. But then, strange things started happening. A picture frame containing my photo would consistently fall at night, making a very loud noise, which was strange because it always landed on my bed. My sister and I had a bunk bed with a built-in shelf under the top bunk where the picture frame was placed. Additionally, our TV would randomly turn on at various times during the day with the volume set very high, always tuning into a strange, old black and white channel that didn't even exist on our smart TV. But that's not the worst part. Out of fear, I started sleeping in my grandma's bedroom and sharing her bed, leaving my sister to sleep alone. One day, while I was sitting on my phone in my grandma's room, I suddenly heard my sister laughing really loudly. Being the nosy little shit that I am, I ran to the bedroom to see what she was laughing at. When I arrived, I found that my bed, which she usually hangs out in during the day, was completely empty, and that's when I remembered that my sister wasn't even home. She had left about 20 minutes ago. In that moment, I froze and realized I probably shouldn't have gone to the bedroom, so I quickly ran back to my grandma's room and immediately texted my sister to tell her what had happened. And that just kept happening, the picture frame falling, the TV turning on. We were constantly terrified and felt watched in our own home. At one point, I confided in my friend at school, and she suggested that I pour holy water on my door or something similar. I'm pretty sure we never actually did that, but we did do something that made her go away. But a few weeks ago a few weird things happened again. My sister was cleaning up the bathroom when she saw someone pass by and head towards our bedroom, but when she went to check the bedroom, thinking it was me, she saw no one. So she headed towards the kitchen, where I was, and asked me if I had gone into the bedroom, and I said yes because I had gone there earlier, but I just went to look for a hair tie and then went to the kitchen to make lunch for myself. I had been there for a few minutes, and my sister had just seen that person, so we knew it wasn't me who she saw. Later on the same day, she was heading into the kitchen, and she passed by our cupboard, and the spinning cake board that was on top of the cupboard suddenly fell out of nowhere and almost hit her on the head, yet it somehow didn't break. It was made of glass, and so she immediately ran over to tell me, and I said, Do you think she's back? Then a few days ago, we were home alone, and I was watching a Minecraft ARG, searching for a world that doesn't exist, really recommend, on my grandma's TV because our TV broke, and my sister was doing something on my mom's computer, and we suddenly heard a weird sound, so I turned to my sister panicked and asked, "Did you hear that?" And she had indeed heard it, so I immediately ran to lock the door. And another thing that has been happening often recently is that my dogs are constantly scratching on our door at night, begging to be let in, and when I did happen to let the dog in one day, he just looked terrified and refused to get out no matter how much I yelled at him or tried to push him outside. My dogs are always stinky even after we give them baths and pee everywhere because we haven't had the chance to neuter them yet, so my grandma doesn't let them sleep inside. So yeah, I've been haunted, and I think I'm getting haunted again. A haunted attic. Well, I don't know what to start off with. First of all, this incident happened 2 weeks ago, and I'm still super terrified. Also, I don't have any proof, but I hope you will believe me. Here it goes. I'm 14 and male. I had recently moved. This took place in a small country called Estonia. My mom had stored a huge pile of boxes in the attic almost a month ago. Some of the boxes contained some useless stuff from our old house. To give you a quick layout of my house, when you enter the house through the front door, there's the kitchen to your right and the closet to your left. There's also the living room, straightforwardly. Right before the living room there are the stairs, which go either to the second floor or to the basement. On the second floor there's my room, my brother's room, my parents' room, and the bathroom. The attic goes up right before the bathroom. So I was sleeping somewhere around 2 a.m., and suddenly my ears caught a strange noise coming from above my room, this faint creaking noise. I tried to forget it first, but when it got a little louder, I sighed to myself, took an LED flashlight, and went to investigate. Our attic has a rectangular shape and is about 30 square meters. I shined my flashlight across the place, but all I saw were the boxes and a couple of blankets on them. Meanwhile, the creaking was still going, and I got the feeling like it was right in my ears, just like I was hearing it in my head. In my opinion, that was very odd, and I just couldn't find a logical explanation for it. And then the creaking stopped and was replaced by a very silent panting. The noise was coming from the far left corner of the attic. That's the moment when I just get the sudden feeling of dread inside my stomach, and my brain is telling me to just leave it and go away. I shook it off and began to slowly wander towards the spot where the noise was coming from. Now I was right at the corner, and the panting stopped. I couldn't tell what the absolute hell was making that noise. Suddenly my flashlight began to flicker. I had just replaced the light bulb and the batteries. No way that this could be happening. The flashlight turned off for a second, and then it went back on. But what stood in the light made me jump back in pure horror. For a brief second I saw a girl standing in the corner, only 2 to 3 meters away from me. She had this empty look on her face. Then she gave me a slightly tormented grin. Then the light turned off again. When it was dark, I heard a whisper right behind me, "See you soon." Then my flashlight turned back on. At this point I was so terrified that I fell to my knees, covering my ears and closing my eyes, trying not to cry. When I got back up, I sprinted back down the attic stairs and literally dove under my blanket, pulling it over my head. I may seem like a coward, but you have to understand the fact that I don't have any sisters or nieces. I didn't get any sleep that night. In the morning I told my mom everything I had experienced the last night. She looked at me with that strange look, as if she didn't believe me, but when she saw the horror in my eyes, she did. So, I hope you believe me and never go into the attic alone, especially at night. My family is being haunted by a series of bizarre coincidences. This happened to me when I was 15 and has stuck with me ever since. As a kid, I had a few brief supernatural experiences that I always passed off as paranoia or hallucinations. Sometimes I would see things out of the corner of my eye or feel something brush against the back of my shoulder, but it never fully convinced me of anything paranormal. After my parents divorced, my dad moved into a small apartment complex, and my mom moved in with her new boyfriend and his children. We all got along well enough, but as we grew older, we drifted apart. Before I continue, I need to provide some context. My mom was in the army before I was born, and luckily she survived with no serious injuries. Since then, she has continued supporting the military through donations and events. It was a huge part of her life, and I think some of her dedication came from wanting to honor her father. Her father, my grandpa Charles, enlisted in the army when my mom was 17 and died in war. I never met him, and I don't know much about him, but I doubt that matters for this story. About 3 years after the move, I was entering my freshman year of high school and in a really bad place mentally. The homework was overwhelming, and family fights had left me tense and drained. One Friday night, I was staying up late, watching movies and eating junk food. It was just before 2 a.m. when I got thirsty. I got up and walked to the fridge without turning on the light since I knew the layout of the house so well. I filled my red plastic cup at the water dispenser when I heard a faint, terrible screech from the darkness to my left, where the living room was. It was subtle but disturbing, like the sound your couch makes when its wooden frame scrapes the floor. I turned my head but told myself it was nothing. I have 3 dogs, so it could have been one of them. Still, I felt a chill. I decided to leave before my cup was even full. I took a few steps when I heard a raspy, human cough. My heart dropped. We didn't live in the safest area, and the thought of an intruder terrified me. I turned around instinctively and froze. Standing in the living room was a man with a prickly beard, tired eyes, and his mouth slightly open. He didn't look ghostly or supernatural. He looked real. And then it hit me. That man was my dead uncle. He had died in a hiking accident earlier that year. I felt chills crawling over my entire body. I didn't scream, but I was terrified. After that, everything gets a little hazy. I remember walking back to my room quickly and locking the door. I tried to watch more movies, but I stayed awake all night, shaken. I told very few people what I saw, and they all suggested it was just lighting tricks or my imagination. I forgot about the incident until a few weeks ago, when I went to a diner with my mom. I'm in my early 20s now. We were eating and chatting when a man walked past us. He had a camo jacket with a veteran badge pinned to it. My mom said, "Thank you for your service," and he smiled and nodded as he passed. She turned to me with tears in her eyes and said he was her father. She didn't say he looked like him. She said it was him. She was overwhelmed, and we left the diner quietly. At home, she tried to find a photo of her father, but there were none clear enough to show me. I can't say if it was a coincidence, but it felt eerie. Then, just this morning, something happened that cemented my unease. I was making breakfast when I heard it again, a faint but chilling screech right behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. Some may say it's just a strange coincidence. I wish I could believe that. But I have a feeling it's something more, something I can't explain. Haunting of Tunnel's End. I wanted to share my first ever experience. I am 19, and this happened when I was 17 and a senior in high school. All names: Zach, Eric, Mindy, Nathan, Ryan, my ex Aiden, and Trix, me. Below, there is more of a backstory for this to make sense. Since I was a kid, I have had this weird sixth sense. I now know what it is. My mother would always say that I would start crying in loud places and could never sleep. To this day, I have been unable to sleep, entering what I refer to as a trance, during which I begin to zone out, fixating on a specific spot and gradually becoming aware of details or sounds. It's a normal occurrence that lights flicker. I had to get rid of a touch lamp where you only have to slightly press it to turn it on. I don't ever feel alone, but I've felt it for so long that I've learned to tune it out and sometimes even ask to stop messing with things or just give a simple greeting. On July 28, 2022. My friends and I went ghost hunting. I know, great idea, we were dumb teens and it was summer break. By now I had pushed the idea of being a medium away and ignored it. We met at the park and joked. Mindy is kind and the sweetest person ever. She wandered off picking flowers 3 times, this will be important later. It was strange that she kept wandering off, but we were so accustomed to it that we brushed it off, took the flowers from her, and continued laughing and joking. After everyone had arrived, we started and headed off to a nearby tunnel. It was narrow, and nothing happened. It was fun, we should have left it like that. Eric had finally joined us, and we were all excited to have one more, so he joined us. That's when he brought something up, the tunnel behind his house. We got excited and all crammed into 2 cars and headed to his house. We got to his house, there were around 10 of us. Aiden had been telling me how he and another guy had performed some type of communication. I found out it was a ghost box, at Mindy's house, and they got a couple of things. One was flowers that had been picked 3 times. Remember, Mindy had picked flowers 3 times. We all finally gathered, and that's when Eric started with the story. There was a disabled kid that lived around the area. He was invited to a pool party where he was only invited to get bullied. They ended up pushing him into the nearby pool, hitting his head, and ending him from the impact. The individuals responsible for his demise took him to the location he was visiting and buried his body where a tree was said to have grown. I still don't know if the story is true. We awkwardly laughed and looked at each other as Eric led the way. I was already having a strange gut feeling as I was zoning out, the way I still do, and not saying anything, but I wasn't the only one having a hard time. My friend Zach was feeling sick already. As we got closer and closer, I started to look around and ended up getting closer to my ex-boyfriend Aiden, who asked me if I was okay. When we were about 10 feet away from the tunnel, I stopped, along with Aiden and Ryan, who stayed behind me, unlike everyone else who went into the tunnel. Then I started to panic and looked around. Then I saw it, a small head peeked out. It was blurry but still clear to me, and then I started to hear "get out," almost like a warning. I looked around as Aiden kept trying to get my attention. "Leave." I heard it again. That's when I felt something shake me from behind, yelling at me to get my friends who had gone into the tunnel. I could only softly look up. The tunnel went up the hill. I didn't know Nathan had gotten up the tunnel and had seen something. I still couldn't move, but Aiden and Ryan immediately believed me and started to get them out by telling them what I saw and felt. We regrouped, and at that moment, I noticed that Zach was on the verge of vomiting, Nathan was unable to speak, and I also couldn't explain my situation. I just kept asking for us to leave. I don't remember being able to speak. Nathan still couldn't tell us what was wrong, as I had just gotten in the car feeling strange. I asked to be dropped off at home, and they all agreed to take me there instead of returning to Nathan's and Mindy's house. I learned the next day from Aiden that Nathan had seen a 4-foot-tall black-eyed child. I also learned that when they returned to Nathan's and Mindy's house, their younger brother walked into the living room and asked their mom if she was in her room, but she wasn't there, so they went to check. The 4-foot-tall child appeared again. Apparently, Mindy had asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" I believe that the entity followed them home. Haunted Historic Roscoe Village House. Hello, I am new to this, but in my teenage years I shared about my experience living at historic Roscoe Village in Ohio. At the time of the story I was around 8 years old. The home was built in 1944. The upstairs had 2 adjoining rooms. My bedroom had a doorframe but no door, and the connecting room was my brother's. Each room had a walk-in closet. But my room had a crawl space that led directly to the attic. I remember it always being freezing in there and having an eerie feeling when I had to go in. That night, I had a few toys/Barbies scattered on the floor in the closet. Do you remember the Barbie from the movie Barbie as the Princess and the Pauper? The doll was programmed to sing multiple clips of the songs from the movie. Around 2:30 to 3 a.m. while my sister and I slept in our bunk beds, I faintly heard singing. I realized I'm not dreaming and was more alert. I repeatedly heard the phrase "Yes, I am a girl like you" emanating from within the closet. I get a weird rolling feeling in my stomach when I notice the songs are not going in order. It's the same one repeated. I wake my stepsister up so she can hear too. I remember her looking at me, and I knew she was also scared. Both of us were too frightened to get out of bed, as any 8-year-old would be, so we called out to my brother in his room. He eventually wakes up and comes in. Upon hearing it, he immediately assumed we were playing a prank on him, as any brother would naturally do. But I'm guessing when he saw the look on our faces, he knew this wasn't a joke. With my brother, we felt the courage to get up and go look. In the closet we turned on the light, the familiar freezing feeling not going unnoticed, and the first thing to catch my eye is looking directly into the dark, scary attic. Because the door to get into it from the closet, the one I always left shut because F that, was open. Then I direct my attention to the Barbie lying on the floor. Still playing the song. There was nothing near the doll, no damage to the button needed to be pushed to initiate the songs. My brother picked it up. We all 3 looked at each other, unsure of what to do with it. I told him to throw it out of the window. I couldn't shake the bad feeling in my stomach. The doll was thrown out. Not wanting to wake our parents, we went back to bed. This time both my sister and I are sleeping on my brother's floor. The next morning we went downstairs, and my stepdad found the doll in the flower bed outside and brought it back in. It was sitting on the counter. No longer singing. It wasn't signed when my stepdad found it. We relayed last night's event to our parents. Although it was brief, I saw the look of worry flash in my mother's eyes before she started trying to reason with us about the possibilities of what happened. I believe the dreams began after that night. In my dream I am at the Roscoe home, and I open the closet door and hear crying. I look into the attic and see a girl hunched in the corner. That was the first vivid memory of strange occurrences in that house, and afterwards, I experienced even more unexplained events. In my early 20s I moved back into that same house and rented it from my mother. I would hear a muffled voice and the sound of feet shuffling above my downstairs bedroom at night. Right above me, upstairs, was the closet of my old bedroom. Also, my son wouldn't sleep upstairs. He was 4-ish at that time. I have always had a supernatural obsession and feel some sort of connection with being spiritually attuned. Thank you for making it this far. I believe this story is 100% real, and the source, my father, is a man who does not exaggerate, and I trust his word. However, it is up to you to decide whether or not to believe him. I need to start with some context for this story. My father, 70-year-old male, is from a small town in Italy with 3,000 people. The town has become smaller in population over the years, with only the elderly and the most stubborn of people left. My father's house has a lot of history. It was built in the late 1800s, and my family has always lived in it since the house was built. Many people have died in the house, and even on my trip in 2013, I slept in a bed where people died in their sleep. I did not know this until years later. A few years ago my father went to Italy for a holiday. My father is a hardcore atheist, he believes in no gods or ghosts. I am religious, but my father makes fun of my beliefs, however, he still respects them. My father was raised in poverty just after World War II, so he learned to be extremely cheap in life. He has visited his home in Italy at least a dozen times with nothing weird happening. This all changed on his trip in 2017. He had invited a guest to live with him since he said this would save his friend money while visiting Italy. The first few weeks seemed very normal. This, however, soon changed. One day a family friend came to visit my dad. They were cooking pasta, yes, very Italian of them, and the friend who was living with my father was folding clothes. My father and the family friend noticed this person looked like they were in a trance. It seemed as if they were thinking about something very important while folding the clothes. Then, this friend just walked off into another room without saying a word. This was very odd since this person always seemed to be very extroverted and was extremely chatty just minutes before. Regardless of this, my father just brushed it off. A few days later the family friend came to visit my dad again. While the man was leaving, he slipped on the stairs and almost fell. This was odd because, for the staircase, each stair had a sort of groove to it that made it fairly hard to slip off the way the man did. Obviously, they just assumed he slipped on his own. The very next day the man who was living with my father was again acting very cold, as if he were thinking about something intensely. My father decided to ask his friend what was going on. His friend simply said he felt a dark presence in the house. My dad knew this man really well and took this comment very seriously. However, he was really against the belief that paranormal entities exist. But what he saw on the staircase forever changed his belief. A few days go by and my father is alone in the house at night. He has outdated lighting. The house just has a little bulb in the kitchen to light it up and a few dimly lit lights in the bedrooms. The stairway where his friend slipped that leads to the road had no lights. The only light source available for walking downstairs is the dim light from the upstairs kitchen that illuminates the stairs. My father had to use these stairs to go outside, and what he saw scars him to this day. By this time the friend living with my father had left the house to go back to his home country. In the evening my father was standing near the top of the stairs, and at the bottom, next to an old chair, was a black figure. He described it as a black figure made of smoke that was shaped like a human but as if it flowed like water. He also mentioned that the smell was terrible, similar to the smell of rotting eggs, but unique enough to say with certainty he has never smelled it before. Anyways, my father is just standing there shocked at what he thinks he sees. It is very dark, so he partly thought he was imagining this. All of a sudden the figure goes up the stairs, and my father describes the figure as a human, but when you try to look at the face, no matter how hard you look, you cannot see it. My father's heart was beating like crazy, and he thought he was going to have a stroke. He claimed that he was unable to move and thought the figure was controlling him. Eventually, his mind is clear again, and he is able to think more rationally, and by this time the figure soon dissipates into the darkness. My father was uncertain whether the events he experienced were real. He did sleep in the house that night, however, he felt uneasy and decided to sleep in a bed and breakfast for the rest of his trip. Now, remember, he is super cheap, so to leave a perfectly good house and pay for a bed and breakfast certainly means he truly believed he saw a ghost. He also got a priest to bless his house. He was a hardcore atheist, so paying money and wasting time to get a priest to bless the house only supports my belief that my father is not making this up. A few years later, my father returned to his house and reported that nothing unusual happened anymore, except for hearing doors slamming upstairs, which he attributed to drafts from the windows. Now, after this event, my dad still does not believe in God. However, he does believe sometimes people stay on Earth a little longer than they are supposed to. I hope you enjoyed this story. Thank you for listening. Waverly Hills Sanatorium Experience. Hey all. A few years ago I traveled with my ex and some of her friends to the Waverly Hills Sanatorium tour for one of their birthdays. I will admit, overall, I am skeptical but very hopeful about the paranormal. I just generally don't believe things unless I have seen them with my own eyes and try to find the most logical answer before just having my hopes of something more magical with this world happening. As we go through the tour, the guides deliver their usual talks and speeches, which feel more rehearsed than genuine. However, the overall vibe of the place is creepy, which enhances the experience. I would recommend it if that's your vibe to go visit and learn the history of the place, if nothing else. We were moving through the facility. Our guide had shown us distorted pictures that had been in the rooms we were in. He would take us under the tunnel that they used as disposal. Overall, it was a really good tour, and I learned a lot, but I was still just feeling like this was all a tourist show more than anything. We get to the dorms and kitchen area. The guide is telling us all the supposed hauntings and sightings in the area. Now the way the dorms are set up is they have a door, or door frames. And they are small, maybe 12 feet across. One side of the dorm has a balcony, and the other has a hallway where we stood. Our tour guide wanted to do shadow work or try to find shadow people. Personally, I believe that shadow people are a trick of the brain that occurs under specific conditions, which is why our tour guide wanted us to stand in a particular spot in the hallway. He's calling people up, letting a few go one by one, so I just start looking around the building. Well, I look directly through the door I'm standing next to, and on the other side I see a figure of a man. I could never really make out his face, it was extremely dark. However, there was a soft blue light around him. I just don't know if the soft blue light was coming from him or from an emergency light nearby. Anyways, he was about 5 feet 8 inches, had shoulder-length white hair, was wearing a white t-shirt and denim coat and pants, and had a beer belly. We stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, but in reality, it was probably more like 15 seconds. A side note here is that he wouldn't have been able to see the shadow work from his vantage point. So regardless of what this was, it was really creepy just seeing someone standing across a haunted dorm room doing nothing but looking in the direction of me and who I had come with. After those long 15 seconds, he turned and started walking slowly. I tell you, I jumped through the dorm the second his eyes passed the wall. I placed one foot in the middle of the room and landed at the other doorframe, looking in the direction he had gone. There was nobody there, my first thought as he went into a dorm next door, but he would have had to run from the time he left, and there was no sign of him there either. All in all, it was a cool experience, and it has always kind of stuck with me. However, the real convincing part to me was when my ex and I got back home. We were pretty tired but needed to take care of the dog and cat, both of whom came to greet us as we walked in. We sat in the living room for a minute when a ball flew out of my office and into the living room. Both animals were with us, and when I checked the room again, it was empty, just like the dorms. This was 4 years ago, and I'm convinced to this day that we actually had an encounter with something that night. Just as a last point in reference, I studied our group and workers obsessively when we got to more open, well-lit areas. Not a single person I saw had the hairstyle or clothing this man did. There's something evil in that basement. This is not my story but my dad's. I will relay it to you as he relayed it to me as best I can. My dad used to work as a supervising janitor for over 10 years. Almost 99% of the places he cleaned were typical, everyday locations. He cleaned office buildings, small workshops, factory lobbies, and similar places. After about 5 years, he worked his way up to being a supervisor of a specific team that cleaned a building that manufactured things for the government. One day I asked him on a whim if he had ever cleaned any places that were haunted, as every place he cleaned before being a supervisor was at night, and he was almost always the only one there. I was surprised when he said he knew of one haunted place. This is what was known as the Easter Seals building in my family. The Easter Seals are a volunteer group who help children and people with autism function in the world. I have Asperger's and, as a child, was a part of this program and knew the building well. My dad told me that on the main floors when he was there he would hear children running around and laughing on the upper floors and sometimes on the same floor he was on in the other rooms. He always was adamant that the children meant no harm and said that when he would hear them, he would say out loud to them, "Don't worry, I'm just here to clean. Don't mind me, kiddos," he said. The children would try to play with him by kicking balls around corners and misplacing his cleaning supplies, which made him feel more at ease because he believed they were just seeking attention. My father believes that if a ghost is trying to interact with you in a playful way, you should at least respond verbally to show that you mean no harm and that you do not pose a threat. The next thing he told me was about a part of the story that clearly scared him, which I found very strange. My father was raised in an environment where he faced physical confrontations and was subjected to punishment at home if he did not emerge victorious in those conflicts, so witnessing him exhibit fear was an unfamiliar experience for me. He said that cleaning the basement of the place was the worst part of that job. He said that when he was upstairs hearing the children, the energy in the place was normal. He said it felt as if real kids were present and that the basement neither felt cold nor smelled of anything rotten or unpleasant. But the second he would enter the basement, it would almost petrify him. He said that it was probably 20 degrees down there no matter what, even if it was over 90 in the rest of the building. He said that it was quiet but too quiet, like the white noise our ears hear was even sapped from the area. He said that there was a hallway leading into the maintenance area of the building, and when he turned on the lights, the hallway lights remained off even though they had just been changed, making the darkness in the hallway feel unnatural, like the quote something took the light. His first couple times there he tried to talk to it like the children, thinking they were down there too, but when he did, he felt like something was about to attack him from the darkness. He said he never went down that hallway to clean it. My father is also the type of man that puts at least 120% into anything he does, and anyone who doesn't just isn't a good worker. It was clear to me that my father was not joking about not cleaning a significant part of a building for at least 2 years. In conclusion, I will always believe my dad, especially with this story. He talks about ghosts in a very matter-of-fact way. Not that there might be something there, but that there is something there, and to just leave it alone. But out of the things he told me, I will always remember this, and there is something evil in that basement. I worked at a historic courthouse and had many weird encounters. It was at the Atlantic County Courthouse in Mays Landing, New Jersey. I have mentioned a few of my experiences before. But one of the ones I rarely mention happened when I was coming into work one morning. Attached to the side of the courthouse, there is the old sheriff's mansion. That's where the sheriff and his family lived back in the early decades of the 1900s. In the 80s the house was used as offices. But in the years since, the house has been vacated and sealed off behind a locked door. Only the guard has access to it while he does his rounds. One morning, I parked behind the courthouse and headed to the rear entrance. As I walked up, I glanced up at the third-floor attic window of the old mansion. I nearly dropped my coffee. There, up in the window, there was a brown, human-shaped figure staring down at me. My blood froze as I could make out the head and shoulders of a child-sized person looking back at me. As I watched, the figure glided back and out of view into the attic. I immediately ran into the courthouse to the door that connected it to the sheriff's house. The door was locked. I knocked on it and put my ear to it. The entire house is very creaky, and I would certainly hear if anyone was walking around or coming down the stairs. Nothing. I ran to find the guard, and he was deep in the midst of a conversation with another employee on the second floor of the courthouse. I told him what I saw and urged him to unlock the door and come with me to check the mansion. Being as used to the ghostly activity, he refused because he was in the middle of assisting the employee. But assured me no one was in the mansion, as they would have to let them in. One of the ghosts who allegedly haunt the courthouse is that of a little girl who is heard running through the hallways and calling out for her mother in the basement. It is believed that she is the spirit of the sheriff's daughter, whose room was up in the attic. During an authorized ghost investigation we did up in that attic, I did an EVP session. And I asked, "Is anyone here with us?" And on the recording I caught a little girl's voice responding, "Me." I loved working at that place. It's kind of spooky, nevertheless. It haunted us for years. My family moved to a small village in 1979. The village is along the highway where our people are originally from. We lived there for about 4 years, and then we moved back to our old small town. It was a sad homecoming as I came back to no friends whatsoever. My mother had agreed to send me during the summer for short visits with my best friend and cousin, Laverne. It was 1986, I was 12 years old. I went there to visit, and it was the same cute little place. It is oppressively hot as usual during the summer, and the only option is to visit the small establishment with pool tables and a few video games. She and I visited until approximately 10:30, it was not a lengthy walk to her residence. We stopped at the train tracks and lit a joint. Smoking pot is old me, I would not recommend it. We stood in the dark passing it back and forth. We chatted about whatever we did since we last hung out, and it was nothing much, being that we were just kids still. At the train crossing, we stood at what used to be my house. It had burned down not long after we left, but still stood the small shed with one window that we had never used. The glass was long gone, and so was the door. We could see right through the shed, as the door was aligned perfectly with the window. It was a fairly bright night with no clouds and a huge moon above. She and I had been staring at the shed for absolutely no reason at all when a long, skinny shadow of a person stood up into the window. I felt my heart sink, and the world turned around and looked at me. I looked at my friend, and she was still watching it, her eyes wide and her mouth gaping. I looked back and saw the creature starting to climb out of the window. "Run," she whispered with a shaking voice that I had never heard from her before. We ran as fast as we could down the road and around the bend until we reached her house. We stopped at the light pole, looked back from where we came from, and didn't see anything. We listened and didn't hear anything either. She said, "Look at me." I looked up, and she asked, "Do I look stoned?" I shook my head, but I didn't actually comprehend her question whatsoever. She said, "You do," she said, "just keep your head down, and let's get right to my room." We went into the house and did what we planned. I asked her what she thinks that was. She replied, "It was probably just Vince trying to scare us." We didn't talk about it again. Eventually I stopped going for visits, and we drifted apart for many years. Last year, 2025, I went on a small vacation. I had a stop in her city, so I messaged her on Facebook Messenger. I told her what hotel I would be at, she came to visit, and we talked about a lot of stuff that went on in our lives. I brought up the shadow, and she told me something that nearly made me stop breathing. She said she went to walk to the store during winter. She took the small road leading past the old cemetery that lies in the middle of the village. It was too cold to walk all the way around, so she just went for it. She got a short way through the road when she saw a shadow climb up from behind a stack of lumber. It stood tall and stared at her. It didn't seem to have eyes or even anything that resembled a face, but she could feel its energy burning into her. She stopped in her tracks and started to back up. When it jumped off the lumber, she turned and ran. She was quite pregnant at the time, so running with any sort of speed was impossible. She got close to the main road, and a hand reached in front of her face and covered her eyes. She couldn't see anything now. Pitch black, and trying to escape, she tripped and fell into the ditch. Unable to see, she just yelled, "Jesus!" It wasn't like a curse, it was more like a prayer. When she yelled, the hand slid off her head. She saw its long, skinny fingers slide to the side and disappear. She looked around, it was gone. I sat there in disbelief. I had been having a recurring nightmare of that exact same thing happening to me for many, many years. Same road, same hand, same word. I haven't had the dream since we discussed this, and I hope I never have it again. Sometimes I feel the need to drive back just to look down that road and pray. I pray it never finds us again. Maine house haunting. About 6 to 7 months ago, my family moved to this house in Maine that was built in 1986. After we moved in, my mother became friends with the previous owners, a mother, a father, and their son. Everything was fine for a while, but a month or two after moving in, things started to get weird. For context, my father and older brother go to work at roughly 6:30 p.m. and don't arrive until 3:30 to 4 a.m. Thus, I, my mother, and my younger sister are home alone until they arrive home. We have a basement in the living room that was recently renovated a few months before moving in, and there are 2 rooms down there, my older sisters, who moved out a few weeks before, and my older brothers. Usually, my mother and I go to sleep between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m., and my little sister goes to bed a few hours earlier. So, my mom and I are mostly alone together in the living room. Our first little experiences were just hearing noises and small things in the basement, such as light footsteps and creaks. We thought nothing of it until it started getting worse. One day, I was in my room on my computer, headphones off, my mother in the living room calling with her friends, my little sister asleep in the room next to me. Suddenly, I hear a loud groan, sounding like a girl's voice, in the bathroom right next to my room. At first, I'm like, "Girl, why are you groaning?" Because I assumed it was my younger sister. A few minutes later, my mom walks into my room and asks if I heard it too. I say yes, and she tells me that it was not my little sister. Immediately, I felt a pit in my stomach. My mother heard it behind her in the living room, yet I heard it in the bathroom. There were no animals in the house, and my mother's friends on the call heard it as well. We locked our bedroom doors that night. I covered mine with my dresser, and she made me sleep with a knife just in case. A few days after that, just before bed, my mother and I started hearing what sounded like talking and light footsteps downstairs. It sounded like a man. It got so bad that she made me go in her room with her with knives since her room door didn't have a lock. The talking got so loud and the footsteps so loud that my mother called our dad and made them come home early to check the house, in fear of a squatter or something being in our basement. A moment while we were waiting in bed, I heard a voice talking near the window. I thought my mom was on TikTok. My mother then turned to me, looking scared, and asked if I had heard that. When my father and brother came home, they found nothing. After that, I began hearing clattering noises in my closet at night. I assumed it was the wind, although I was scared. The next day, my mother walked into my room in the morning and told me that she had spoken to the previous owners, who lived there from 2012 to 2022, and the mother had told her about her son. Her son was about 8 to 10 years old, and his old room was my current room. The mother said the son would talk to no one and say he sees a boy in the closet. It turns out there was a young boy who died in the area and was following the son until they moved out. My mother said he might now be following me. Another time, I was in the kitchen at about 2 a.m., everyone was asleep, and I was about to do dishes. Before I started, I suddenly heard what sounded like a child crying. I immediately became concerned, as I believed it was my younger sister, and I pressed my ear against their bedroom door. However, I did not hear any crying from within. I went back to the kitchen and heard it again before it stopped. Another time was about a month later. I was on call with my best friend. Keep in mind it was nighttime again, and I went to the kitchen to grab dinner. I came back with my plate, and my friend asked what I was eating, and right when I responded, she was like, wait, stop. What was that? Was that you? It turns out she had heard a low hum as I was speaking, and I did not hear anything. She said she heard it on the call, at the same time as I was speaking, so it couldn't have been me. This was my most recent experience. I was walking downstairs to grab something from my brother's room in the basement, and as I was walking up the stairs, on the last few steps, I heard what sounded like a woman humming for almost 2 seconds. As I entered the living room, I glanced at my mother on the couch and exclaimed, "What on earth, Mom? You scared me so much." And she said, "What?" She sounded confused. And I told her I heard her hum, and she confusedly denied it. We asked my little sister, but she also denied it. I immediately called my best friend to tell her what happened, and as I was explaining, my mother was leaning over the stairs before yelling, "I just heard it." My mom sounded genuinely both afraid and shocked. I could barely sleep that night. We have since moved out a few weeks after that last experience. We haven't experienced a single thing since then in our new house. I used to want to see something paranormal, but after months of living there, I'm glad it's over. It made us feel scared and not safe, especially with my father and brother gone every night, barely believing us when we told them about it. I encountered something terrible and very strong at a diner. The lady checking me out said she thinks she's haunted. Just an hour ago, I left the movie theater after watching a light-hearted movie, nothing scary at all. Right after, I went to a restaurant to get some dessert. I had a hankering for pie. As I was there, I felt this nope. I call it a nope because my back arches severely, away from whatever is behind me. This nope only happens when someone/something bad is behind me. I don't claim to be psychic, but I am sensitive. Usually, this only happens with living people. I had an art teacher in middle school who followed my class into high school, who gave me this feeling anytime he was behind me, in the hallway, in the classroom, or anywhere. If he were behind me, I'd feel it. Every now and then, I get this feeling, and it usually goes away as soon as the person/thing in question isn't behind/around me. This feeling in the restaurant stuck the entire time I was there. I kept getting waves of it. It made me shudder, the kind of shuddering you do when something cold touches your back. Now, let me say that I didn't feel cold. I just felt nope. After I was done, the person with me, whom I'd been relaying this nonsensical feeling to, and I went up to the register to pay. As we were up there checking out, I looked at the lady at the register and blurted out, "Is this place haunted?" I don't go around asking people that shit. I just don't. I don't need to look like a lunatic asking about bad vibes and cornflakes. It's just not something I do. This lady, without skipping a beat, tells me where the other location she works at is. She said she literally watched a printer nearly be pushed off a counter in the back room, and another person there witnessed it too, and it was caught on security camera. She said she and the person who witnessed it were both working at the restaurant I was at tonight and said she was a little worried because she's noticed things now moving around in her home. She asked if it could have followed her, and I told her yes. I said she needed to sage herself, her home, and the freaking restaurant and tell it to get the duck out. Throughout the entire ride home, I continued to feel a strong sense of nope. So bad to the point where I just saged myself, the person I was at the restaurant with, and my whole damn house. I feel much better after sage. This shit was just too strong not to cleanse every inch of the place, and I feel the compulsive need to share this with you all. Does anyone else get this nope, as I call it? I feel crazy for even sharing this, because despite sharing other experiences, I've never really talked about the nope with anyone before, as I think it just sounds absolutely off my rocker. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm looking for validation or closure or what, but Jesus Christ, that feeling was so strong tonight. There's a mimic haunting me. The story I'm about to tell you is 100% true, and it happened to me about a year ago. At the time, I lived in a basement apartment with my fiancé, male, 25. His name is Louis. At first the apartment was everything we wanted, but over time the energy shifted. What once was a positive vibe turned into a heavy, depressing, and honestly, very negative energy. Because it happened so long ago, I haven't thought about this incident since, and to be honest, I dislike thinking or talking about it. I believe that the more you talk about it, the more it becomes real, but it's now too hard to ignore. One night my fiancé and I were working late. We're both content creators, so our evenings usually consist of writing scripts and editing our videos, and occasionally we have time for a show or movie. However, this night was one of those late nights where we were both grinding. Louis is a gamer. When he'd play his games, I could hear him in his office. He has a car simulator, and when he shifts gear, I can hear it easily from my office. This night I was very focused, and Louis opened my door slightly. I saw him from the corner of my eye, his silhouette, hat, and everything. However, I would rather not be interrupted or bothered because I was on a roll. So automatically I said, "Leave me alone. Not now." I'll admit it was a bit snappy, but we have this rule where we don't knock, talk, or chat until a certain time, and it wasn't that time yet. I was not in the mood, but I felt bad, so I called his name immediately after he walked away, but here's the thing. 2 seconds later I hear Frank shifting gear in his car simulator and yelling. That's when my heart dropped to the pit of my stomach and my eyes widened because there was no way that he was just at my door. It takes time to set up his entire self in his car simulator, and there was no way in that short amount of time he went from my room to his office. I continued to call his name so he would come to my office, but it took like 3 to 4 times before he heard me through his headphones. He comes into the room with a confused look on his face, wondering why I was calling. Immediately, I asked him what he had wanted earlier when he had come to my room. He looked at me puzzled, and he had no idea what I was talking about. So, I asked if he knocked on my door, opened my door, and came into my room at all within the last 5 minutes. He said no. I frantically explained everything to him, including what I had just experienced. He was creeped out but not as much as I was, clearly because that night he slept like a baby. However, I did not. It didn't stop there, though. There was more than one incident that took place that night and even later that week. This story is to explain why I think it's back. My fiancé and I moved somewhere else because the basement apartment was just too depressing, and honestly, we needed more space. We now have 2 floors. This is great because I don't hear Louis shifting gears anymore, and I can film/edit without hearing him film his content. The space is nice. Plus, we have room for our 2 beautiful little kittens. My office is located upstairs, which includes the entrance, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Frank's office is downstairs along with our bedroom. It is a beautiful apartment with high ceilings, and at first it reminded me of Gilmore Girls. In my office, particularly, there are 3 huge windows. During the day it's beautiful, but at night, it's kinda ducking creepy. At first, I loved coming into my office at nighttime because naturally I am a night owl, but now I hate it. My 2 8-month-old kittens don't even like coming into my office now, not even during the day. At first, I didn't think it was a bad energy, but my mind is shifting fast. Both Louis and I have seen this phantom cat. At least that's what we named it, and at first I thought it was the spirit of his doggo that recently passed away, but now I'm not convinced. I consider myself very in tune with energy, and I've always been a very spiritual person since I was a child. I pick up on things quick. My cats look into my office and stand at the door, not lately, but in the past, their tails have gotten puffy. They won't even stay upstairs at night. In fact, our bedroom door will be open, and they choose to stay in the bedroom. We tried introducing them to wandering and running upstairs at nighttime after Louis and I went to bed, but one time we did that and they came running into our bedroom freaked out. Ever since that incident, they have refused to go back upstairs alone at night. The other day I saw someone standing at our front door. I was filming. It looked like Louis, so I didn't acknowledge him because I knew he had a key and could clearly see me filming from the window. I thought he was dropping off one load of groceries at the front door and then going back to the car to grab the rest. He was taking so long, so I called him to ask why. When he answered the phone, I could clearly hear the background noise of a public setting. He said that he was just checking out at the cash register. At first I thought it was a mimic, then I thought it was gone, but now I think it's something much more evil. It's not attached to the house, I get that. It's probably Frank or me, but I don't know. I don't know how to get rid of it, so if you have any advice, please don't be shy. Haunted? No explanation after 37 years. I'm 54 years old now. As a teenager I lived in a small town in central Virginia. Our town had fewer than 2,000 people. I was 17 in 1983, and one of my best friends, Chris, lived across the street from a peculiar house. When I first moved to town in 1980, a family lived in the house, and their daughter had been friends with Chris. Her name was Joy. Joy told Chris that every member of her family had seen ghosts in their house. I'm not sure if anyone believed them, but one night the whole family piled into the family car, took off to a motel, and never returned to the house. It was assumed that this was a reaction to another supposed ghost encounter. I moved to town and became friends with Chris the same year Joy's family took off. I never really knew them, so all of that previous information was secondhand to me through Chris. Joy's old house remained empty. By empty, I mean no one bought the place. Actually, the house still contained most of the furniture and a lot of the family's belongings. They had literally grabbed what they could carry and left. Chris and I and our other friends liked to poke around in the house to see what we could find. Over the years, kids had thrown rocks and broken every window in the house. Every square inch of the floor upstairs, downstairs, and on the stairway was covered in broken glass. Like most houses in our town, there was little to no carpet inside, just bare wood flooring. One day in October 1983, Chris and I decided to skip school. We did this way too often. It's not like getting a real day off because we had to stay out of sight. Our small town was full of nosy people who would turn you in for skipping. In such a small town, most people knew your parents. This day Chris and I decided to hide upstairs at Joy's old house. There were still beds and furniture upstairs, and we carefully sneaked in and plopped down upstairs to read, talk, and nap the day away. Early in the afternoon, we suddenly heard footsteps downstairs. Heavy footsteps that crushed the broken glass with each step. We immediately thought someone had heard or seen us through a window and was coming to bust us. This old house had vents built into the floor so that heat from downstairs would float up through the vent to upstairs. The houses in that part of Virginia were built in the early 1900s, and a lot of the houses in the area had these vents. They were basically just an ornate grill covering a large hole in the floor about a foot square in size. As we heard the footsteps crunching glass directly below us in what used to be the living room, we carefully peeked through the vent to try and see who was downstairs. With the footsteps directly below us, we could see no one downstairs. Then, suddenly, the footsteps were upstairs at the top of the staircase, right outside the door. Chris and I quickly whispered that we would fling the door open, act surprised, and pretend we were just passing by when we thought we heard kids in the house, which is why we came in to investigate. So, we walked to the door of the bedroom. The footsteps had walked right up to the door and stopped. We opened the door and there was no one there. Chris and I stood silently looking at each other, confused. After a moment, we began searching the house. The entire house. No matter what room I was in while searching, I could hear Chris in another part of the house because the crunching of glass was so loud. Finally, Chris went outside and completely circled the exterior of the house. From the inside I could hear him circling the outside because the house was surrounded on all sides by trees and there was a thick blanket of crunchy, dry leaves all around. With no windows intact, it was easy to hear the crunching leaves from anywhere inside. We both had heard the same thing. The footsteps were heavy and made by something with two legs that sounded like standard human walking. Whatever it was, it had enough weight to crush glass underfoot. After the fact, we realized we had never heard the footsteps on the stairs. They went from directly below us to right outside the upstairs door. The house was completely empty, but we would have heard someone approaching or leaving because of the dry leaves. Neither of us believe in ghosts. We won't say what we experienced was a ghost. What we will say is that in all these years, neither of us has been able to come up with any other logical explanation. I'm still in contact with Chris thanks to social media, although we haven't been face to face in 33 years. After such a long time, you can begin to doubt older memories. You can wonder if you are mentally embellishing these things. Chris and I have not shared this story with many people. They would likely assume we were either lying or fabricating the events. When I told my wife this story a few years ago, I contacted Chris and asked him to give his version of these events. I only asked, "What do you remember about that day we skipped school at Joy's house?" His story was identical to mine, to my relief. Joy's house was demolished in 1984. Today the wooded area around it has grown so much there's no sign a house was ever there. My haunted house. I'm the second oldest of 5 children, and from the ages of 9 to 13, I lived in a very active haunted home. People are always so dismissive when I describe living there, so I've stopped telling the story, but I'm making an exception for this. I grew up in South Florida, and the house really wasn't that old in the grand scheme of things, TBH. I think it was built in the mid-1970s? We experienced all of the classic phenomena, such as disembodied voices, footsteps, knocks, fleeting shadows, and lights turning on and off, the actual switch, not merely a flickering light. But there were some truly terrifying moments as well. The first week we lived there, I had the same dream of a young Hispanic woman ending herself every time. And it was always different. The first time she ended herself. The next night she tied something to her foot and drowned in the pool. Then she took pills, etc. It was every night that first week, but I would dream about her sporadically for the rest of my time there. There was this constant unnerving feeling of being watched by something you couldn't see but could sense was there. My bedroom was the most active, unfortunately. I experienced several instances of being touched and pinched and hearing my name called/whispered while staying in there. I've always enjoyed writing and had a nice big desk in my room that I loved. One day, probably a year after moving in, I asked my mom to pick me up a new journal when she went to the store. As soon as I got it, I set it on my desk, closed and clasped, without a pen, ready to write after going to the bathroom. After returning, every single page of my new notebook had been scribbled on, and some had been torn out and crumpled on my floor. This freaked me out, obviously, because I had only been gone maybe 2 minutes. The journal was closed with the little clasp locked, and all of my pens were put away. When I told my mom, she blamed my siblings, assuming I had lied about the amount of time I was gone. It just wasn't possible with how thick the journal was for my twin toddler siblings to have scribbled. It looked more like aggressive scratches with a pen, on every single page within the 2 minutes it took me to go pee, let alone the strength it would have taken to rip out the pages from my new hardcover journal. Later that week, my little sister and I saw a t-shirt lift up out of my laundry hamper, fly across my room, and eventually fall to the floor after running into my TV. Terrifying. The fact that I still slept in there after seeing that blows my mind, but I was a child, and neither parent believed me, so Lamau. On a different occasion, I was just grabbing something out of my room and going to the living room because I ducking hated being in there. My bedroom had 2 slatted closet double doors that you had to pass by to leave. On this day, they were open, and as I grabbed what I needed and turned to walk out the door, I saw a small figure of a boy sitting on my closet floor. He had his knees pulled up to his chest and was rocking back and forth. He looked about 3 or 4 years old and had dark brown hair, with obvious tears streaking down his cheeks. The strangest part was that he had fire trucks for feet. To this day, I still try to rationalize this and have nothing Lamau. The best I can come up with is that maybe they were slippers? But still IVK. Anyway, his lips were blue, his skin was gray, and it was clear that he was dead. I quickly left the house and didn't return alone for a few days. The final straw with my bedroom was when I had to stay home alone for a week from school with strep throat and tonsillitis. Both of my parents were at work, and all of my siblings were in school when it happened. I was sitting up in my bed with my legs under the covers watching something like Cheaters or Maury or some other trashy daytime show. A child my age should not have been watching LMFAO, but my point is that I was wide awake when this all occurred. I heard footsteps walk down the hall toward my bedroom and stop right in front of my closed door. From this moment forward, I was kind of frozen. I don't know how else to describe it. Like fight, flight, or freeze. I was like piss my pants terrified but couldn't move a muscle. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this TBF. My door creaked open, and I could feel the presence of someone or something ominous enter. By ominous, I guess I just mean it like filled me with dread. The audible footsteps. My bedroom had carpet floors, BTW, so I shouldn't have been hearing any footsteps at all, continued, and whatever this was approached my bed. I felt it sit down at my feet, on top of the covers, and literally saw the blankets and mattress lower with the indentation of a body. That's when I snapped out of whatever TF was going on with me, threw my blanket off, and hauled out of my room. From that day forward, I only went into my room to grab necessities and slept every night on the couch in the living room. It's sad because I truly loved my bedroom. It was the first room I had that I didn't have to share with a sibling, and I painted it myself. Unrelated, but I painted little green stars on the wall behind my bed after that song Pale Green Stars from Everclear because my name is Amanda too, and my parents also fought all the time, and I was a little edgelord and really identified with the lyrics, Lamau. But my point is that I loved my bedroom, I had made it my own, and I didn't want to leave it. However, I never felt safe in there again. I turned 30 in a couple months, and I still have bizarre nightmares about that room. Of course the activity wasn't exclusive to just my bedroom, and I experienced/saw many things after that, sleeping in the living room and all over the house, honestly. It got so bad that I started sleeping immediately after getting home from school, when everyone else was awake, and staying up at night with all the lights on to remain vigilant. Monstrous looking things would peer in through the living room windows at night or try to call to me down the hallway. I did my best to ignore it, but that was completely ineffective, Lamau. Anyway, over the course of our time there, my parents grew to hate each other, my dad slid further into alcoholism, all of our mental states got significantly worse, my parents divorced, and the house went into foreclosure and ended up sitting vacant for close to 5 years. The Halloween just after I turned 14, my mom, siblings, and I were renting a different house in a different city at this point, but our old house wasn't foreclosed on yet. My older sister and her friends invited me to go back with them and do a séance. I agreed, so stupid, I know. We packed a cooler full of alcohol and brought candles, bread, and wine for the offering. We did research beforehand and wanted to be respectful. Obviously now I know the respectful thing would have been to have just left it TF alone, but my sister's friends didn't believe us about the haunting, and we wanted to show them. The house hadn't changed much, except for the lack of electricity and that everything was closed and locked up. Most of our belongings were still there. We only took the bare minimum when we moved. Anyway, we set everything up, held hands, repeated the words, and that's when it began. All the candle flames started to rise at the same time, like something out of a cheesy horror movie, isk. It started as a gentle tapping on the sliding glass doors behind us that eventually grew louder and more violent. It turned to knocks and then banging that came from all different directions with no identifiable source. We started to hear whispers and then full-blown conversations, but I couldn't make out the words. Then something that sounded like an argument between a man and a woman was coming from none other than my ducking bedroom. It all came to a climax when we heard something being thrown and glass shattering. We all jumped up at the same time, releasing hands, and then the candles blew out on their own. Freaked, we grabbed our flashlights and tried to figure out what broke. When we explored my room, that's when I saw it. A framed childhood photo of me had been thrown off the wall and onto the floor across my room by my closet doors, and the glass on it had shattered. That's when we left. To this day, my mom denies that anything happened in that house. Although she had been grabbed in her sleep several times and had witnessed the fear in all of her children who lived there, my mom still denies that anything happened in that house. My little brothers and older sister don't like to talk about it, but I was just recounting stories with my little sister on the phone yesterday, so this is all very fresh in my mind. One of the things that was there, whatever was really dark, followed us to the next house we rented. I can go on and on. I seriously have so many experiences if anyone's curious. Anyway, thanks for listening to this. 3 months living in a haunted cabin. I didn't believe in ghosts for the first 22 years of my life. Always thought there was some reasonable explanation for hauntings, and honestly, I still do. Maybe it's not a ghost, maybe some kind of weird gravitational energy messing with things? I'm not sure. But anyway, here's my story. My roommate Dee and I moved to Colorado with limited savings into a small cabin located in a remote area. Our closest neighbors used their cabins as summer homes, so we didn't really have anyone nearby. That's what's cool about living in the mountains, though, there's a sense of total isolation you won't get anywhere else. You can turn off everything in your living space and hear nothing except the breeze, no highways, no car alarms, nothing. It's very peaceful. But after the first week or two in this cabin, Dee and I both began noticing weird things happening. First was this eerie feeling we would get. I remember Dee once joking with me that he didn't like being in the cabin alone because it gives him creepy vibes. There was one back room in particular where, if you stood in it at night, you would feel like you were being watched. Sometimes I'd come home from work and just have this sense of total dread and unease. At the time I wrote it off as me being paranoid. I was experiencing hallucinations of things that weren't there because I wasn't accustomed to the complete silence and isolation of winter. I started noticing stuff getting moved around as well. One morning, my car keys would be missing, and I'd frantically search only to find them in a weird spot, like on top of our refrigerator. I thought Dee was messing with me, but he kept insisting it wasn't him. Soon, he started having his stuff get moved too and would get really pissed off at me, thinking I was trying to prank him back. One night we were sitting around playing video games when something flew across our field of vision. We both looked at each other for a second before realizing we had both seen it. For context, the cabin was a typical A-frame, so for the most part it was one big room separated into a loft and a downstairs, with the kitchen and our beds at one end and the living room/TV/wood stove at the other end. Whatever small object flew across the room had gone from the kitchen all the way to the front door. We examined it closer and found out it was a single green bean from our meal that evening. We kinda held it up and looked at it for a second. It had flown all the way across the house, from the stovetop in the back all the way to our front door. We really didn't have anything to say about it, it was just super weird. The next morning was when I knew our house was haunted. I was watching TV in the front room and taking some bong rips when suddenly bam. The roll of paper towels we had sitting on our kitchen counter flies into the bong, knocking it off the table and spilling water everywhere. The roll had been thrown with force, let me clarify. It was so forceful that I initially thought Dee had tried to throw it at me. I angrily turned around to tell him off, dude, you almost broke the bong, right? Dee was in the shower the whole time, getting ready for work. I felt a chill go down my spine. Some force, whether it was a spirit, ghost, or something else, had thrown this object across the room. Dee didn't believe me when I told him, and I couldn't blame him. But he soon came to his senses. The next couple months were crazy. Everything from car keys to full decks of cards to box cutters would be thrown around our apartment right in front of our eyes. We'd hear weird growling sounds at night that sounded like they were right in the middle of our house. To be fair, sound carries weirdly in mountains, so we probably just heard nearby animals on this one. One time my roommate stormed out of the shower furiously. "Why the duck?" he asked. "Would you turn the lights out on me in the shower?" I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. However, the most frustrating aspect was that our belongings continued to go missing. I mean, it got ridiculous. One night we left our car keys in a very particular spot just to see if they were moved in the morning. When we woke up, they were gone. But not just that, they had been tucked between the pages of To Kill a Mockingbird on our little bookshelf. Took us hours to find them. One morning, I couldn't find my phone no matter how hard I tried. We tried calling it, and it would ring, sounding loudly throughout the house, but we couldn't pinpoint the exact spot. Finally, we tracked the ringing to the bathroom, but it sounded like it was coming from behind the damn wall. The vanity sort of hung there, so I figured, duck it, it's probably in the wall, seeing how weird everything is. Maybe there's a hole or something. I took the vanity off its hanging nail, and as soon as I moved it, my phone slid out the back and clattered on the floor. Dee and I looked at each other. His face was totally pale. Like, how the duck could that even happen? How is that possible? The haunting got to the point of just being silly. We had a friend come visit, and as soon as she opened the door, my car keys were thrown at her face from across the room. She was like, "Wait, is the cabin haunted?" We joked that yeah, things get thrown around sometimes, you just have to ignore it. She didn't want to stay there anymore, and that was the point when I asked my landlady if she could provide some history on the cabin we're renting. She became extremely defensive about it and asserted that she had owned it for years without experiencing any unusual occurrences. In summary, we were evicted a couple of months later. I don't want to go into the reasons because there was really no good explanation, and it's not the focus of this story. But yeah, the uneasiness persisted until we moved out, although in the last month of living there, the ghost chilled out on throwing objects at us. I still don't have a concrete explanation for the weird stuff that happened, but after that I definitely believe in ghosts and other stuff we don't understand. My haunting, true story. I was 11 years old when this couple gave my family a very nice house for free. At first we were happy to move and happy for the fact we just got a house for free that we didn't need to pay anything for. Not even the bills. We thought it to be a miracle. However, the first day I was there, I immediately knew something was wrong with it and refused to go upstairs. My mom chalked it up to just being an irrational fear because I was a child. But I knew something was wrong with the upstairs area. A few hours later, after moving boxes and furniture, my mom states that she has to go to the store and that I will be staying home. Alone. In this creepy house. I begged her to let me go to the store, and she refused. I sat on the couch on the main floor, heard footsteps running upstairs, and decided to sit outside and wait for my mom to get home. It soon got cold outside, and I was soon finding myself back inside. At this point I felt that whatever was upstairs was downstairs and in the second living room, and I could hear humming coming from the second living room and decided the safest place in the house was going to be my parents' room and soon went in there to hide. I locked the door and started to sing Jesus Loves Me, hoping to scare whatever entity it was away. I soon fell asleep, and this is where I screwed up. I had something approach me in my sleep. It was a faceless man with nothing but a mouth. He got in my face and said, "You're next," so I woke up. Told my mom that I didn't like the house and wanted to move back. She brushed it off. Well, eventually my entire family came to realize the house was indeed haunted. After having doors open and close by themselves, electronics would turn off and on by themselves, and we even experienced some poltergeist activity. It even affected our family. We would argue for hours and generally just started to hate each other. My parents got divorced. And everything was falling apart. We even had multiple priests come and try to rid the house of whatever entities were in it. We found out later that it had multiple. I also started to become more and more delinquent. Getting into trouble. Having huge anger problems and refusing to do anything that has to do with religion. I found and still find it stupid. But I didn't realize until I was grown and married that it might be more sinister than just growing up. My then wife and I were having an argument when all of a sudden, pure fear showed on her face. She grabs our child and leaves for the night. She soon came back but wouldn't come into the house. I asked why, and she said, "Something is wrong with you." Again I asked why, and she explained that as I was yelling, A dark figure rose up, seeming to come from inside me and hovering above me, and that's why she chose to leave and why she also wouldn't come back inside. She eventually did, but she was evidently nervous and would search the house repeatedly. We ended up getting a divorce. And a few of my past relationships ended because of the same dark figure. I've come to realize that I might be haunted. Every house I move into has paranormal activity in abundance, and my experiences with seances and Ouija boards always provide incredible activity. Such as a planchette flying off the board. Or going to know after we've said goodbye. I'd like to hear your thoughts. My summer camp had a haunted cabin. I went to the same camp from 95 to 09. It's in the woods of the PNW on Puget Sound and a pretty small camp of 150 campers a week spread between about a dozen cabins. I started as a camper when I was 8, going 1 week every summer. Then, when I was 12, I became a CIT, spending my whole summers there. When I turned 18, I was a counselor in the summer, and by 21, I was an instructor in the off-seasons. So, it's safe to say I was very familiar with the land and lore of my specific camp. There were a few camp legends. One was Walter, the giant fish that supposedly lived in the lagoon. We even had a campout spot across the lagoon called Walter's Landing. It being the PNW, of course there were also tales of Sasquatch roaming the woods. As a young camper, these legends were creepy and believable. But as I got older, I got wiser and came to realize these were stories to keep kids from sneaking out of the cabins at night and encourage them to not stray out of the swim section / stay in the boats on the lagoon. Naturally, these stories were technically forbidden to be relayed to campers. Not everybody likes scary stories. I like them, but I get it. There was one forbidden tale, though, that most counselors didn't even share with other counselors unless they had an experience in a specific cabin. I think I first heard the stories in my early teens, maybe when I was 13 or 14. I was probably earlier than most kids in becoming a CIT because I got along well with the counselors and was part of a small group of returning campers, around a dozen, who had transitioned to CITs. And I was pretty open about my love of all things creepy, macabre, mysterious, or paranormal. Anyways, there was one cabin. We'll call it Craven Cabin. Yes, that's an homage to Wes Craven. In Craven Cabin, people would hear strange knocks and noises at night, find things moved from where they left them without explanation, and get just an overall off-putting vibe from the cabin. The origin story that was told over the years was that an unnamed child, whom we took to calling Timmy, was spending his week in Craven Cabin. He had fallen out of a rowboat, drowned in the lagoon, and was never found. And thus, forever haunts Craven Cabin. Now, this camp was founded in the 1910s but was moved to its current location in the 60s. When I was older, a friend and I did some digging on the internet and at the closest library to camp, and we couldn't find any evidence of this story being true. But that didn't discount other people's experiences, much less our own. I'll only tell my story, as it is the only one I personally experienced. The only time I spent a week in Craven Cabin was my first year as a counselor, in the middle of the summer. I was 18 years/0. Like I said, I'd heard tales here and there about noises and things being moved, but I wrote them off as people being spooked out about being in woods at night or just trying to scare some teens. I didn't believe them, as I had never spent the night in Craven Cabin. The cabins were built in the 60s, sans a few newer ones, and on stilts, as the camp was on a big hill. Craven Cabin had a long ramp lined with sandpaper leading to the front door. To the immediate right of the entrance there was a bathroom, and beyond that a square main room with 2 counselor bunks on the right, mine being closest to the bathroom, and a wood stove in between on the right wall. The 5 kids' bunks were on the left. Opposite the front door there were 2 large sliding doors that led to the big back porch with a picnic-style table and benches, all of which were raised maybe 12 feet off the forest floor. It was the second night when it started. My co-counselor Chris had the night off, so he was in the staff lounge. I was alone with the campers and a CIT named Mike for about 2 hours. Mike slept in the bunk across the stove from mine, above Chris. About an hour in, the kids were sound asleep, as was Mike, and I was reading my book when I heard a knock-knock on the wall near my head, which from the outside was maybe 10 feet off the ground. It startled me. It sounded intentional. 2 close raps that were not subtle. I told myself it was a tree and continued reading, fully aware that it wasn't windy or even breezy. Then, after a short time, I heard it a second time. Knock knock. This time it was on the roof. I told myself that maybe it was wildlife or maybe a pine cone falling. But again, it was 2 immediately sequential raps, sharp and clear. I was admittedly starting to have trouble convincing myself it was squirrels. Over the next half hour or so, the knocks happened a few more times. On the kids' wall, below the floor, from around the bathroom on the back porch. I no longer had the capacity to convince myself of conventional explanations. Knock knock, 2 raps. Every time. And everybody else snoozing away. Just as I was psyching myself up to go outside and investigate, Chris returned from the lounge. Oh, the relief. So as not to wake anybody, I quietly asked him if he saw any critters outside. Raccoons? Squirrels? Hell, even deer? No, and nope. Uck. I told him about the strange knocks, and he wrote them off as nature, the same as I had attempted to convince myself earlier. We got into our bunks and eventually dozed off without further knocks. The next day, day 3. Even though I wanted to talk to someone about it, anyone, I kept the experience to myself. I didn't want it to get around to the directors, much less the campers. It wasn't necessarily hard to not tell my tale. The day was filled with activities and fun, but it was constantly in the back of my mind. We ended the day with a campfire full of songs and skits, laughs and cheers, and happily headed back to our cabins as darkness settled in. We got the campers ready for bed. The campers changed into their pajamas, brushed their teeth, and engaged in end-of-the-night conversations about archery, boats, and other fun activities. It was my night off, so I bid everyone goodnight and headed off to the lounge with my flashlight. It was nice. Snacks and candid conversations with counselors my age. I forgot all about the night before. Eventually Kathy, the camp director, flashed the lights and said, "All right, folks, it's 11. Time to go home. Have a good sleep, y'all, big day tomorrow." Just like she ended every night. We said our goodbyes and headed to our cabins. I walked with a couple of my neighbors, who peeled off as we got closer to our cabins. As I arrived at the bottom of Craven Cabin's ramp, my insides sank. I suddenly realized how cold and quiet it was. No crickets or cicadas. No breeze. Just the distant sound of waves lapping at the shore. I was frozen. Every cell in my body is telling me to turn around and go back to the safety of the lodge. The lights of the lounge. The warm comfort of fellow humans. I didn't feel alone? Yeah, that was it, I didn't feel alone. I shone my flashlight around and saw nothing. Okay, deep breath. I forced myself to walk up the ramp to the door. It felt like forcing myself to wade into a body of water that was too dark and cold. I made it in and quickly got into bed. It felt safer in my bunk. Another deep breath. I closed my eyes. The next thing I knew I was hearing the camp bugle. It was morning. And no knocks. Phew. It was day 4. A good day, French toast for breakfast and tacos for dinner, hell yeah. After dinner, there was an all-camp game of capture the flag, which is my favorite. Just the same as any night, we ended it at a campfire, and then it was time for bed. It was Mike's night off. The CITs each received 1 night off per week, scheduled right in the middle. He deserved it. Mike was a good CIT on his way to being a great counselor. The kids dozed off one by one as Chris and I read our books. It was quiet except for some kids' snores and taco farts, ha. I was reading Jurassic Park for maybe the 5th time. I love that book. And if I remember correctly, Chris was working on a certain new wizard book series, required reading for camp at the time. Then the peace was broken. Knock knock. It was the wall between our bunks, behind the wood stove. I locked eyes with Chris, raising my eyebrows as if to say, "See?" Chris let out a PFFT, shook his head, and went back to reading. Though I did see him scan the room with his eyes. He seemed to be having the same problem convincing himself that I had 2 nights before. I also went back to my book. I made it maybe 1 more page in when knock knock. This time it was the middle of the floor. Then another. Knock knock. It was the porch wall right next to Chris's bunk. He shot out of bed, slid the back door open, and scanned the porch. Nothing. He looked back at me. His face had fallen, eyes wide and mouth open. I was sitting up now, breathing with my chest. He closed the door and slunk back into his bunk. I lay back down, attempting to slow my breath. There was no more reading now, but neither of us turned off our flashlights. Knock knock. This one was slower, almost impatient, and right behind Chris's head. He quickly lifted his upper body with his arms and turned to look at the spot the knocks came from, and then he turned to me. He mouthed, "What the F?" I widened my eyes, gave a tiny shake of my head, and made a microscopic twitch of a shrug while mouthing, "I dunno." My eyes darted around the room. The kids were still out cold. Chris looked back at the spot on the wall, slowly raised his right hand, made a loose fist, and gave it 3 light knocks. Knock knock knock. They were quiet knocks, almost faint. We held our breath and stared. Knock knock knock. It responded. It was not lost on us that it was 3 raps, not 2. Intentional, sharp, and clear. I don't know how long it was that we were frozen, staring at the wall, trying to comprehend what was happening. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. The moment was broken by Mike coming back from his night off. He could tell something was up. The room was tense, even with 10 deeply sleeping children. Chris quietly inquired before I could, "Was that you?" "Was what me?" shrugged Mike. We responded together, "The knocks?" "No, why was the door supposed to be locked?" I whispered this time, "No. Did you see any raccoons out there?" Mike whispered no as he climbed the ladder into his bunk and settled into his sleeping bag. He looked bewildered. We all laid back in our bunks and turned out our lights. I kept my flashlight clasped in my hands on my chest. I stared up into the dark for a while, trying to control my breathing before closing my eyes. But sleep never came. Slam drag. It sounded like somebody dropped a heavy bag of laundry on the ramp just outside the door. The old cabin shook. Then it sounded like it was dragged all the way down the ramp, scraping against the sandpaper. I shot up, turned my flashlight on, and froze. Chris and Mike were up too. Campers were stirring. "What was that?" one asked through a yawn. I just dropped my book. I said it without knowing what was coming out of my mouth, like a slow reflex. "Go back to bed, big day tomorrow." Okay. That was it. No more knocks. I barely slept. I learned the next morning that neither did Chris or Mike. Word got around to some of the staff the next day. We couldn't hide our fatigue. A few people had asked if the kids kept us up. We didn't have the energy to lie. We said strange knocks kept us up but kept the details to ourselves. Nothing about the knocks, responding to Chris. Nothing about the slam and drag. Later that day Kathy pulled me and Chris into the office. I'm not sure she believed us. She was new that summer, transferred from a camp out of state. She hadn't heard the stories and didn't know the lore. She was skeptical. But she saw that we believed. That we were shocked. She told us to come straight to her if anything else happened. Even if it was late, we were to wake her up. And that was that. The next 2 nights were quiet and uneventful. The campers went home none the wiser. Kathy promised me, Chris, and Mike that we wouldn't have to be in Craven Cabin again. She kept that promise. Craven was quiet the rest of the summer. In the years that followed, all 3 of us returned, but we never set foot in Craven. Though the cabin wasn't done. At least once a summer somebody had a new story. New knocks. We still kept our tail between us until the end of each summer. Only to be shared to let other counselors know they weren't crazy. And to add them to the legend of Craven Cabin. I can't tell you what it was. I just don't know. But I can say this all definitely happened in the early 2000s at a camp in the woods of the PNW.